He knows that name very well, the incorrigible, violent, and reclusive one, completely unbalanced. The tedious successor of Count Perdium, Cecil Perdium. The most powerful knight in the north doesn't understand how he could have lost to such a weak opponent. His adversary, on the other hand, is not surprised, since he had invested a great deal of money in that trap, made especially for him. Amidst a completely devastated battlefield, decorated with the bodies of his companions, that knight in full armor approaches him carrying his axe like an executioner, until Cecil decides to ask the knight if he's enjoying the view. That only makes the man furious, shouting whether Cecil tries to be stupid on purpose. It couldn't have been a trap unless he had known about the plans before they happened. That's when our protagonist reveals he didn't just discover the plan. He also learned the size of his enemy's army, as well as the locations of his spies, and even the auxiliary troops who were in charge of delivering supplies to all of them. He simply knew all of that, and that defeated knight was in the palm of his hand. But those are hard words to accept because there were secrets he hadn't revealed to anyone. That's why he can't accept that someone as weak as that managed to uncover all his plans. Before he could continue his string of insults, the face of that warrior was struck by the sole of his enemy's boot. He had no patience to wait for the man's acceptance and told him to shut up. Throwing his helmet to the ground, our protagonist said he could be attacked as many times as they wanted because he would win every upcoming war. Taunting his enemy, he asked if he knew why that would happen. And before he could answer, the boy said it's because he always has a plan. A year ago, life was unfolding normally around the territory of Perdium, within the kingdom of Lithuania. That was when the boy woke up, still very confused, staring at his own hands, not understanding what was happening. The biggest surprise wasn't waking up in that bed. It was realizing he was still alive. That should have been completely impossible because he was sure of what had happened just moments before. A great clash of swords had occurred, and because of the force of the impact, he was completely disarmed. His body was already covered in wounds, and he was utterly exhausted from the prolonged battle. That final effort had come at a cost. All of his wounds collapsed at once. His opponent had declared the battle over, and that the king of mercenaries, one of the 7 most powerful men on the continent, had been defeated. That also symbolized the end of the war. Our protagonist's enemy was a knight who was also one of the 7 most powerful men on the continent. His name was Aiden. Pointing his sword at the boy, he asked if he had any last words, and Cecil revealed that his only regret was being unable to complete his revenge. Completely furious, he urged his opponent to finish the battle quickly. Aiden responded with a mocking smile, saying he was nothing but an ignorant fool. He had known that mercenary was the successor of the fallen Perdium house, but he heard that he abandoned the land after his sister's death. That piqued the interest of our protagonist, who asked how a noble from another land would know such a thing. Aiden said it was inevitable. He had reached a point where he searched for any and all information about the king of mercenaries. Besides that, he had also allied himself with Duke Delphine to completely destroy the Perdium family. That shocking revelation filled our protagonist with overwhelming stress. He never imagined that there had been a collaboration among nobles to bring down his family. The Duke wasn't solely responsible. Aiden said it would be a waste of time to explain it all to someone who was about to die, so he would put an end to this story. But those few words reignited Cecil's spirit, and he began to shout that he would never forgive that man. Ignoring his threats, Aiden said that dying knight could do as he pleased. Then, promptly performing a height reduction surgery on the boy, he left him precisely 1 head shorter. It's all of that Cecil now remembers. It all happened just minutes ago, but now his neck is completely intact. His thoughts are hazy, and he begins to wonder if it was all just an illusion, also noticing that he looks much younger. Suspicious and glancing around, he thinks he might have been captured by mages and used as a lab rat, deciding that he'll make those arrogant fools regret what they did to him. That's when someone else entered the tent. It was a familiar voice asking what had happened to the young master. Ricardo, a soldier from his household, knew the young master was already up and asked if he was planning to leave now. But that soldier was soon caught off guard. The young master had his sword pointed at his throat. Cecil said he would let him live as long as he answered all his questions, making it very clear that the soldier should be fully committed to answering them. For a moment, the soldier looked worried, but it didn't take long before he stopped taking any of it seriously. With an exaggerated reaction, he said this was over the top even for the young master. It was starting to get ridiculous. Cecil couldn't understand how the soldier stayed so calm even while being threatened. His composure left the boy confused. Pushing the boy aside, the soldier said Cecil had fallen asleep after throwing a massive tantrum, which confused our protagonist even more. Touching his own neck, making sure there wasn't a scratch, Ricardo asked if the boy had forgotten what he did. He had insisted on leading the attack against the orcs. All that information left Cecil increasingly confused. He couldn't believe he had thrown a tantrum. That was simply absurd. But Ricardo told him to gather his things quickly, because he'd be waiting outside. Still confused, the boy asked where they were going, and the soldier said there was only one possible answer. They were heading back to Perdium territory. That's when Cecil finally began to realize what was happening. His family's land. Even in his confusion, he remembered how things turned out, and grabbing the soldier's shoulder, he asked him to say that one more time. He wanted to know if they were really heading to the territory that had once been completely ruined. After a brief conversation with the soldier, Cecil climbed to the top of a hill, able to see with his own eyes the lands belonging to his family. There was no doubt that land belonged to his family, but everything was perfectly well maintained. He had seen it completely destroyed with his own eyes. Ricardo approached him quietly and whispered, asking if the young master was all right. He knew they were poor, but the boys shouldn't say things like that about their land, that it was ruined or he might provoke his father's wrath. Cecil immediately pinched his own cheek, trying to figure out if he was dreaming. As he heard his own face and became sure this wasn't a dream, Ricardo watched him with concern. The young master seemed completely out of sorts. The boy looked much younger, and his family's lands were still as they were always meant to be. That could only mean that somehow he had returned to the past. When he was a child, Cecil resented his family for being poor. With very immature behavior and a deep inferiority complex, he often caused shameful scenes, to the point where even his own family began to avoid him. One day, he abandoned his homeland because he couldn't handle the constant criticism anymore. Years later, he became a mercenary. He survived countless battles, gradually built his reputation, and honed his skills, until he returned to the lands that once belonged to his family. But when he arrived, everything had been completely destroyed. That was the day he realized he had lost everything he once had. Despite those vivid, real memories, everything was still perfectly preserved, and the precious people living on that land were still alive. It was almost ridiculous to think he had been sent to the past. He could barely contain the happiness he now felt, realizing it was all real. But the boy's good sense told him it was still too early to celebrate. As Ricardo had said earlier, they were there to face orcs, and he could never forget that day. Because when twilight came, most of the soldiers from that land would meet a violent end. Cecil had wanted to join the soldiers because supposedly only 3 creatures had been sighted, which made him believe he could lead the troops without issue, even with little experience. But the reality was completely different. More than a dozen of those hideous creatures appeared, wiping out nearly all the soldiers, all because the boy had stubbornly insisted on leading them. Those creatures didn't have a clear strategy, so defeating them was still possible. The problem was that no one would listen to a spoiled boy on the battlefield. Before he could think of a way to execute his plan, a loud explosion was heard in the camp. Part of a tower had just been blown into the air. It landed a few meters in front of our protagonist, scattering its debris everywhere. It didn't take long for the troops to start shouting, trying to warn what had descended upon them. Orcs. The creatures were advancing into the camp. Cecil didn't expect it to happen so soon. The creature's charge was far too fast. With no containment plan in place, the orcs began slaughtering the soldiers, almost like travel agents offering one-way tickets to the afterlife. That's when the leadership among them gave an order to the troops. They were to form up immediately. That knight's name is Skovin, and he's the commander of the expedition. He told the soldiers to stay calm as they needed to take up defensive positions. But chaos had already taken over the battlefield. The orcs had turned into butchers. Skovin hadn't been expecting anything like this. He realized they had been ambushed, and there were many more creatures than had been reported. At that pace, it was only a matter of time before they were all defeated. In the heat of battle, someone called out to the commander. There was a warning. He had to look behind him immediately. His life was in danger. Even knowing what was about to happen, there wasn't enough time for him to react, and the one who gave the warning had to take action. Our protagonist's hand grabbed the commander by the shoulders. Managing to throw him out of reach, he pulled the man away from the creature's blade. Skovin saw everything that had happened, but still couldn't believe it. It was the young master standing on the front lines of the battle. But even more unbelievable was what he had done, intercepting that attack with his own blade. Before the monster could react to the strike, its arm was hit. Certainly, more than the pain the creature felt, the shock from the commander and his troops was even greater. The orc began to roar in rage, realizing what had just happened, until its massive body crashed to the ground. The wound was more than it could bear. Cecil began to lament the fact that he still couldn't use mana. Things would be so much better if he had been sent even further into the past. Walking calmly, he approached the commander, who was still on the ground, thoroughly confused by what he had just witnessed. The boy extended a hand to him and asked to be given something. Skovin had no idea what was being asked of him, until Cecil was clear. He wanted the right to command those troops. Skovin immediately composed himself, thinking that request was completely ridiculous, even coming from the young master. He quickly stood up and said he wouldn't allow it, leaving Cecil frustrated. The commander said this wasn't a game, and he couldn't hand over command to the young master in the middle of a situation like that. Cecil knew this wasn't good. The problem was, he would have had the same reaction as the commander if their roles were reversed. No one could trust a spoiled kid. As soon as they finished speaking, another orc approached them, ready to finish what the first one couldn't. Skovin was deeply concerned for the hare, telling him to get back, he would handle it. But Cecil ignored those words and raised his sword aggressively, saying the commander had left him no other choice. He hurled the blade with such force toward the creature that the commander had to dodge it. Skovin immediately grabbed the boy by the collar, demanding to know if he realized what he had done. That was incredibly dangerous. But he realized when it just happened. Looking behind him, he was once again speechless, because the sword had struck the orc's skull with precision. Even with such a severe wound, the creature still twitched in pain, until his body finally succumbed to the extent of its injuries, collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Skovin was trying to understand what had just happened. The boy had struck a vital point on the creature. Cecil approached the commander once more and asked if he knew what was most important in a battle. Before he could hear the answer, it was clear that all the soldiers around were terrified. Cecil said no one wins a fight while drenched in fear. You need to have an unshakable fighting spirit. Then the boy began to run toward his sword, and as soon as he picked it up again, he dashed straight into the eye of the storm, where the fun was happening. With long strides, he quickly reached the creatures that were overwhelming his army. To the surprise of all the soldiers, he had landed atop one of their heads, ending its life with the edge of his blade. Skovin also witnessed everything from the front row, and like his soldiers, he didn't know what to say. Cecil pulled his sword from the creature's head and began provoking the ones still alive, telling them to come at him. The boy promised he'd finish off every last one of them, leaping once again into danger. With precise strikes, he hit those monsters while dodging deadly blows, performing a wide range of unanesthetized surgeries. Skovin began asking himself if he was dreaming. He couldn't move nearly as fast as that boy. The only difference was that the commander could use mana. that fragile boy shouldn't be capable of any of this. Even though it was hard to believe, he could already see the boy was becoming very exhausted. Still, he managed to dodge using the smallest movement possible, conserving what little energy he had, and he struck vital points with single attacks strong enough that there was no need to hit twice. He was practically a sword master who hadn't yet learned to use mana. Maybe Skoven thought that boy could become even more powerful than the current sword master. In the middle of the battle, Cecil continued provoking the creatures, saying he was just warming up. The taunt seemed to work, and all those monsters began to chase him, determined to end his life and crush his bones. The soldiers saw what was happening, and one of them wondered if the young master was running away. It didn't take long for them to turn their attention to the commander. They needed orders. Skoven was still in shock, trying to understand what the young master was doing. A boy had jumped into battle and drawn all the enemy's attention to himself, and right after that began to retreat from the battlefield. But the direction he chose was strange. He was heading straight toward the cliff. Using his full ear-separating capabilities, Skoven finally understood what the boy was trying to do. It was indeed a very bold strategy. That's when he turned and ordered his troops to raise their shields, because all of them were going to follow the young master's path. Meanwhile, the boy was fleeing from the creatures like he was a fentanyl pack escaping from addicts. He knew that if the commander was a capable strategist, he'd already realized what was happening. Cecil would love to finish off those creatures with his sword, but his body was so weak now he was close to collapsing from exhaustion. But he was sure, now that he was positioned at the edge of the cliff, that his family's soldiers would do their part of the plan. The boy was completely surrounded and the orcs were pressing in closer. That's when the creatures sensed something happening. All the soldiers now carried shields and spears, advancing rapidly toward the monsters. Seeing this, Cecil gave a faint smile. His plan had been understood. Now he could jump off the cliff without worry, because soon the soldiers would begin to act. The commander had already given the order to all units. They were to push all the creatures off the cliff. The soldier line managed to push the monsters. Even though they were strong, the soldiers' strategy prevailed. The commander kept encouraging his troops, until finally they managed to shove every last one of them over the edge. The orcs fell to their doom, while the boy clung desperately to the edge of the cliff. Stating that the battle was finally over, the soldiers sighed in relief. But among them, the commander remained worried, wanting to know what had happened to the young master. Then he saw the boy had managed to wedge his sword into the cliff wall, giving the commander a confident smile, as if he were sure the plan would work. For a moment, Skoven was speechless, but soon he forced a smile too. Extending his hand, he asked the young master to try and reach it. But the boy had used up all the strength he had. He could no longer hold onto the sword's hilt. Unable to control his own body due to extreme exhaustion, he began to fall, which left the commander and his men deeply concerned. Some time passed. Cecil began to hear someone calling his name over and over again. He recognized the voice. It belonged to Helena. In a dimension that didn't feel like reality, he was confronted with countless memories of his brother. Cecil didn't seem like a very nice person, and holding one of the fragments of what looked like a mirror, he realized they were memories of his sister. He was suddenly grabbed by the arm. She was still begging him to come with her. That was definitely the kind of dream one has during a fever, full of delirium. But finally, Cecil managed to wake up, lying in a bed. His senses were slowly returning, and he could tell everything was okay. Even if he didn't know how they managed to reach him, he was alive, and that was what mattered most. As he tried to sit up in bed, he began to remember that confusing dream. It was so vivid, it didn't feel like a dream at all. But before he could keep dwelling on his thoughts, his body sent him an instant message. Everything hurt, and in the end, it was his fault for pushing himself past his limits, especially since he still couldn't use mana. The sound of him moving in bed alerted someone outside, who entered the room to speak with the young master. With a big smile on her face, it was clear the woman was relieved that he had finally woken up. Cecil looked at her in surprise. It was Belinda, one of the maids of his household. Placing a basin on the table, she said the young master had no idea how worried she had been, reminding him that she had warned him. The soldiers could have handled that problem. Before she could keep talking, Cecil got out of bed just to hug her. Belinda was confused and asked if something was wrong with the young master, wondering if he had done something wrong again. But the boy said he was just happy to see her again. She had been his personal tutor, always by his side no matter what trouble he got into. Cecil always felt relieved knowing she was there for him. But after his family's land was destroyed, she vanished as well, and he was never able to find her again. He never thought he'd be reunited with her in this lifetime, but Belinda said they saw each other every day. Still holding her, Cecil thought he should tell her the whole truth. So he asked her to listen closely to his words. The Pernium family was in grave danger. Very surprised, she asked how the boy knew that. He began thinking about how to explain it to her, saying that he had died and returned to the past. But Belinda thought he was talking about the incident at the cliff. Completely ignoring whatever he might have said, Cecil tried to clarify things, but to her, it was the boy who was in danger, since his body was still recovering. Right after that, she began to scold him severely, and our protagonist realized she wasn't going to believe a word he said. Trying to convince her was useless. After taking a deep breath, Belinda asked what would happen if he couldn't enjoy the festival because of his injuries. As soon as he heard about the festival, Cecil grew very worried. And Belinda asked if he had already forgotten. Helena was really looking forward to enjoying that event with him. She said it would be wonderful if the two siblings could become close again like they used to be. Then Cecil remembered that during that time of year, there was always a festival in his town. He grabbed a picture frame nearby and looked at it more closely. It was a photo of him and his sister. In his past life, he wasn't able to enjoy the festival because he was traumatized by what he had seen on the battlefield. Things were different now, and he asked Belinda when the festival would take place. She said it was in 1 week. Now the boy had a sense of his time limit, because there was one day in particular that changed his life forever, until someone opened the door and asked if Cecil was in there. The memory he had of that day had haunted him for his entire life. He remembered Helena begging him to go with her to the festival, and the person who entered the room was his sister. In 1 week, she would lose her life. The moment he saw his sister again after so many years, Cecil ran over to hug her. Belinda was so caught off guard she didn't know how to react either. Helena was immediately confused and thought her brother might be playing some kind of prank. Still holding her, Cecil said he had missed her. Helena began to find the whole thing repulsive and pushed her brother away. Cecil felt that the push actually hurt a little and began wondering if his sister had always been that strong. Helena said she only came because Belinda asked her to, but she made it clear she wouldn't forgive her brother so easily, and the boy had no idea what she was talking about. Then she reminded him of what he had said to her, to stay far away because even the sound of her breathing annoyed him. Cecil couldn't believe he had ever said something like that. He knew he hadn't been very close to his sister in the past, but hearing that made him realize he had truly been despicable, so he apologized to her. Belinda and Helena could hardly believe what was happening. The girl thought her brother must have been hit on the head, which would explain why he was acting so strangely. Cecil said he was the one who defeated the creatures, and he couldn't stand hearing them say he'd been beaten up by them anymore. As soon as he finished saying that, he felt his entire body ache all over again. Helena said it was hard to believe him considering his body had been carried into that room on a stretcher. While he groaned in pain, the two of them began to laugh, but that didn't bother him. He simply realized that he was living his life again, and that simple moment was playing out exactly as he remembered it. It was even hard to understand why he had wasted his life. He had refused his sister's invitation to go to the festival because of what happened during the expedition with the soldiers. That refusal was the last time he saw her in his life. Helena's body was found next to her guards in several pieces. The regret still burns in his chest. He feels he should have gone with her that day. Lost in thought, he heard someone knocking at the door, asking for permission to enter. It was Helena's personal guards, Jamal and Felipe. The girl asked if something had happened, since she had told them to wait outside. The guards apologized, but they were delivering a message from the servants. Helena needed to supervise the festival materials. Cecil wondered why his sister was in charge of such a task. Belinda said he'd know if he paid attention, and if a noble had to do something like that, it meant the workforce in their territory was running short. He can't imagine things had really gotten that bad. As his sister left to handle the task, he realized how awful he had been in the past. He hadn't cared at all about what really mattered. Determined to live a different life, he said he helped too, which caught his sister by surprise. Helena looked back, visibly worried. Her brother had changed a lot. Belinda had the same reaction, and now both of them were really starting to believe the boy must have hit his head somewhere. Once outside the house, they headed to the town square, where the festival would take place. The presence of our protagonist made everyone around feel uneasy. Helena told him to leave, saying he was only getting in the way, but the boy insisted on trying to help her. Helena said the best help he could offer was to walk away from the square. Cecil knew his sister's body had been found in the alleys not far from there. She was surely lured or dragged away against her will. To prevent that from happening, he needed to understand what was going on inside the castle. While being pushed by his sister, one of the guards approached the boy to speak with him. Cecil immediately recognized the man's voice. It was old Fergus, who, breathing heavily, said he was relieved to see the young master safe. As a loyal knight, he had come as quickly as possible after hearing that the boy had been beaten by orcs. Cecil asked him not to bring up that subject again. To Helena, that was the perfect opportunity. She asked the knight to take her brother back to his room since he'd been acting strange ever since he woke up. Cecil thought to himself that his reputation was definitely a problem. Since he couldn't change much of what he was living right now, he decided he'd gather more information throughout the week. Turning to Fergus, he asked about the training hall in the castle and requested to be taken there. The man was surprised. He had no idea what the young master intended to do. Then Cecil told him he was going to start training. Having known the young master since he was a child, the old man couldn't help but be very surprised. Agreeing to the boy's request, he showed him the way. As soon as he arrived at the hall, Cecil was amazed. The whole place was very well maintained. It was truly impressive. He realized he'd be able to train there without any trouble. Back in his days as a mercenary, he had never dreamed of having a place as good as that. Fergus said he had kept the place in great shape, hoping that one day the young master would want to use it. He thought the boy had strayed for a while, but he always held hope that it wouldn't last forever. Cecil realized that even in his past life, that man still held on to hope, in a way that made him feel deeply embarrassed. He wished that old man could live a long and peaceful life, because dying is no pleasant thing. Fergus smiled at that remark, as if the young master had already lived a long time. Cecil said he was as sharp as ever, claiming he had died and come back to life, but Fergus politely asked him to stop with such nonsense. The boy dismissed the knight from the room, saying he would begin his training, and Fergus assured him he would remain nearby. In his first life at that age, he thought everyone around him was his enemy, but now he realized he had just been a fool. Now the boy had 1 week to put part of his training into practice. The son of another noble family had been blamed for what happened to his sister. That ended up forcing a territorial war between the two families, which triggered the beginning of their downfall. In other words, Helena's death was the spark that led to a major catastrophe. But now the boy would do everything the right way, and it would all begin with his training. He needed to strengthen his body. The problem was that he didn't have much time to explore. At the very least, he needed to master mana. This was a supernatural resource that allowed humans to push past their physical limits. Most people struggled to sense that energy, but even in the chaos of battle, Cecil had been able to train his mana. The secret was to gather every particle from the air and compress them into a large orb. Cecil had survived thousands of battles. Creating a mana core was far from the hardest thing he had ever done. It was no surprise he became one of the 7 most powerful men on the entire continent. In his past life, he had come across some interesting notes that inspired him to develop his own technique. Cecil discovered he could add more than 1 mana core, and even under these conditions, he was reaching his 3rd. All humans are born with them. The secret of his technique was to unite all of them. This increased his power greatly, but his body was soon overwhelmed by pain. Completely overloaded, blood began to flow from his mouth and nose. After that training session, he realized that 3 was his current limit. In his past life, he had managed to create 5. That technique allowed him to generate explosive and devastating power, but it consumed enormous amounts of mana. In fact, that was one of the issues that led to his defeat in his previous life. He had faced that enemy already drained. If the circumstances had been different, Cecil wouldn't have lost. The technique he created had always been unstable, but it would be useful now, because time and youth were on his side. Aiden would be the one eliminated when they met again. He would make sure that Duke Delphine, and all who hid in his shadow, would be completely crushed by his hand. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. Our protagonist had spent all that time training, and now he was getting dressed, with a sword at his waist. Unlike the people walking around to enjoy themselves, he had a goal in mind. When Helena saw him, she was very surprised. She hadn't expected her brother to actually show up. Even though he had come to the festival, she was certain he wasn't okay. Cecil told her that everyone in the territory should enjoy the festival. Helena said he had been acting strangely and heard that all he'd done over the past week was train. Cecil asked her if it was such a problem for the heir of a knightly family to be training, and the girl said he had never cared about that in his entire life. She even said their own father was incredibly annoying and should hurry up and pass on his noble title. Hearing that, Cecil was overwhelmed with shame. Even though he was acting differently, Helena said she preferred this current version of him. It was as if he had returned to being who he always was. It left the boy deep in thought, because he realized something over the last week. His actions were already changing the behavior of those around him. Meanwhile, Belinda was giving instructions to Helena's personal guards to also keep an eye on the young master. Cecil and his actions were altering the course of events, and he couldn't predict everything that would result from that. It would be up to him to act with wisdom, since he knew the future and would need to adapt as things changed. And for what is going to happen that night, he is already prepared. Helena is buying all kinds of things at the festival, while Cecil remains alert. She walks around the place without a care in the world, but the boy stays vigilant. At the end of the night, she says this was all really fun, but that it's always the same thing every year. She wishes there was something new to do. Cecil noticed the festival was almost over and nothing had happened so far. Maybe his presence was already changing things. Still deep in thought, he heard someone asking his sister if she'd like to try something new. He said he'd heard from a friend that something different was happening in another neighborhood. Helena said she'd blame him if it turned out not to be fun, and Cecil watched her walk away. Now he was sure who was responsible. It was her personal guards, the true traitors and the ones responsible for the great tragedy. Those two had been in charge of protecting her ever since Helena was a small child. They were the most trusted people around her. In the past, it was said they had died trying to protect her, but the boy realized they were involved. They were definitely traitors. Cecil followed them too, and the guards claimed they had finally arrived at the location. They were in a dead-end alley, and there was absolutely nothing in that place. Helena even tried looking around, but there was nothing, and on top of that, the place was filthy. One of the guards said things weren't ready yet, but he was sure the festival would soon begin there. Helena told him he was being ridiculous. It was obvious nothing was going to happen in that place. After examining the surroundings, Cecil realized what was really going on. It wasn't a dead-end alley. The streets that could serve as exits had been completely blocked off. This was clearly a setup. Before he could do anything, Helena grabbed him by the arm. She wanted to leave, saying this must be the wrong place. One of the guards tried to get her to wait just a little longer. Once again, Cecil couldn't understand how his sister was so strong. He asked if she had been secretly training. Without noticing, Helena bumped into one of her guards who was blocking her path. He said they should wait just a bit more. Since Philip was being more assertive, the girl found his behavior strange. She said the two of them were acting weird. Then Jumel said it was never their intention to scare her, but they had accepted a very interesting offer. Helena was completely shocked by those words. That's when another person revealed they were there too. And that mysterious man was accompanied by 2 henchmen. His name was Frank, and he said the soldiers had fulfilled their part of the plan. Jumel approached him, saying it was obvious they'd be able to pull it off. Now it was time for the next step. Frank noticed that the Count's son was also there and was certain he hadn't been part of the deal. Our boy remained unfazed while Helena couldn't stop trembling in fear. The corrupt guard said the boy was a bonus reward. He had followed them all the way there without realizing he was walking into his grave. Cecil asked if the guard really believed he'd walk away alive after selling out the Count's children. Jumel said the boy should start worrying about himself since the 2 guards had earned enough money to live the rest of their lives without lifting a finger. They were tired of that miserable, despicable place. Always poor, always under attack by barbarians. He revealed they weren't the only ones who wanted to leave that land. Before he could continue with his generic speech, our boy sliced through the corrupt guard's body. Jamal didn't even have time to understand what his eyes had just witnessed. That sudden strike left everyone in the alley horrified, and those who weren't scared were now speechless. Cecil said that was no excuse for selling out him and his sister. Now he could turn his attention to the other traitor. Philip couldn't believe his companion had been defeated, not when the enemy was someone so weak. He grabbed Helena in an attempt to shield himself, but it was useless. His skull was pierced by our protagonist's sword. He began to fall while writhing in pain. His body, too, became part of the decor of that dark alley. Frank's henchmen started asking if this was really the Count's useless son, because they hadn't expected him to have combat experience. Frank also noticed something was different. He figured the guards had been caught off guard, but for the boy to take down 2 in a row in just seconds was truly impressive. On top of that, he could also channel mana into his attacks. Helena remained absolutely terrified and asked Cecil what was happening. Our boy held back his words. He's not going to tell her the truth just yet, and with a precise strike of his hand, he left the girl unconscious. He did it so she wouldn't witness what was about to happen in that place. But as soon as he laid his sister's body on the ground, that killer politely said thank you, because they were going to eliminate the guards too, and he said the boy was very different from the rumors. With a pipe in his mouth, the man with glasses asked if Cecil was hiding his true abilities, and with a sword in his hand, our boy said that the answer to that didn't matter. But he was already thinking about his strategy to defeat 3 enemies. Those henchmen weren't that dangerous. The only real problem was the man with glasses, who seemed to have a high mana level. Cecil knew he had to keep that battle as short as possible, and he was already preparing some threads in his hands. He asked those men who had hired them, and Frank replied that it didn't matter because the boy would die soon. And our protagonist admitted he didn't expect them to cooperate anyway, stating that in just a few moments, they'd wish they had. One of the henchmen got ready to fight him, but Frank told him not to. They keep the boy alive to make him suffer, driving the Count completely insane. The greater the pain he feels, the more repulsive his body will remain. As soon as they got the orders, those 2 assassins launched their attack. Unaware that, in truth, our boy had been the king of mercenaries in a past life. The first thing he did was throw an unlit candle toward them. The first assassin didn't know what that meant, and distracted by the candle, he couldn't see the slash coming right behind it. That blade pierced his head with perfect precision. The other assassin tried to flank him, telling our boy not to rely on dirty tricks. Their swords clashed for the first time. Cecil had no intention of letting that man live. Moving his hand quickly, he managed to immobilize the assassin's sword. Now disarmed, he wouldn't be able to block a blow from Cecil's sword. And so yet another person had their height forcibly and irreversibly reduced. As soon as he finished off the second, Cecil realized he had to stay alert, because Frank tried to strike immediately, aiming for his blind spot. If it weren't for the boy's skill, he wouldn't have been able to defend himself in such an unorthodox way. Even the assassin was impressed by that display. He was sure he completely masked his presence. It didn't take long for him to realize the boy had taken the offensive again, launching a slash that nearly hit his head. Frank managed to dodge it, but lost his pipe and nearly lost his neck. Since the 2 were close, the assassin counterattacked immediately. But Cecil, now wielding 2 swords, managed to block the blow. Frank said that was truly surprising. If he had less mana, his head wouldn't still be on his shoulders. Cecil was deeply frustrated knowing he'd landed the hit, but his opponent had blocked it using mana. Frank said he had no idea how the boy had learned such a strange fighting style, especially someone so young. And maybe he'd never get the answer, since the boy would die that night. Sounding quite confident, Frank said he wouldn't be defeated by someone with less mana than him. And that place would become our protagonist's grave. Even under pressure and facing all those threats, the boy kept smiling, which made the assassin extremely uneasy. And distracted by it, he didn't see that our boy was preparing a leg strike, landing a brutal blow to the assassin's face. The impact was strong enough to throw him back a bit. Now with his glasses broken, Frank adjusted his hat and said he wouldn't be defeated by someone with low mana. But just as he finished saying that, he began coughing up blood and not understanding what was happening. It was such profound agony that it was enough to put him out of the fight. Everything had happened so fast he couldn't tell what exactly had hit him, but the weight of those blows had clearly increased enough to break through his mana defense. Cecil calmly approached him, saying that in the past he didn't know his sister had been murdered by someone, and now he knows exactly who's responsible. And in a threatening tone, Cecil said he would make sure he paid for it, as he began to unleash the power of his 3rd core. After destroying his own underwear in the chaos, Frank began asking how that boy had managed to increase his mana so quickly. The answer came in the form of 2 sharp, dangerous swords. The assassin realized he couldn't keep up with that speed. Even so, he did everything he could to prolong his life a little longer. But his efforts were already reaching the limit while the boy kept pressing harder. It wasn't easy to deflect all that power. To him, it was starting to become ridiculous. His hands were throbbing just from blocking those strikes. Even if he could amplify his own mana, the boy shouldn't be able to deliver such heavy blows. The assassin had never heard of any technique capable of producing something like that. It was as if he were facing a completely different person. Prepared to block another strike, the assassin positioned his sword, but forgot to tell it that it needed to stay intact. That's how our boy managed to land the first cut on that disgusting creature's body. The first one that actually made him feel pain and regret being in a place like that. Determined, Cecil pushed forward with his blade to finish the job, executing a piercing attack that couldn't possibly be blocked. It made the assassin writhe in pain, spitting blood violently. But before he could hit the ground, Cecil pinned him against the wall with his forearm. With the situation under control, he said he'd continue from where he left off. While keeping the assassin under his grip, he asked once again who had hired him. As a last resort and desperate to turn the battle around, the assassin tried to use a hidden dagger, trying to at least take the girl's life. He was already prepared to throw the blade. That's when he felt something strange. It was as if his hand was tied to something. Cecil suggested the assassin should stop trying those stupid tricks. It would be much better to start answering questions. If he were willing to cooperate, Cecil might consider removing the sword from his abdomen. But the assassin was realizing those threads were made of mana, and he couldn't move his own body. He didn't even know when the boy had prepared all of that. Cecil applied more pressure on the swords, saying that with the assassin's skill, he should be able to keep himself alive. Unless, of course, someone destroys his mana core. That's when the assassin realized his situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, because our boy had struck directly at his mana core. It didn't just cause sharp pain, it was something that burned him from the inside out. As soon as the core cracked, all that power began to spread through his body. Frank said the boy was insane, that could cause an explosion big enough to destroy the whole neighborhood. But Cecil assured him it was only risky for those without skill. He could make that method work without issue. That's when Frank realized his problems were only getting worse, because that look in the boy's eyes wasn't bluff. It was the look of someone willing to end his life. Desperate, the assassin confessed that it was Count Desmond who had hired him. He said he needed an excuse for House Perdium and House de Gaulle to go to war with one another. Cecil still tried to confirm the information, though he already felt like he had found the answer. Because in his past life, Duke Delphine always left the dirty work to less powerful nobles under his influence. The boy asked if that was why the assassin had come to kill his sister, and the man confirmed it. Now that he had all the information he needed, Cecil drove the sword even deeper into the man's abdomen. Frank panicked. He thought the boy had promised he would let him live. Cecil found it strange that the assassin was suddenly afraid of death after taking the lives of so many innocents. Since the situation was already irreversible, the assassin started to smile. His death wouldn't change anything. He had made sure House de Gaulle would have a reason to go to war, and no one would believe a useless boy like him. Soon the territorial war would destroy the boy's whole family. Tired of listening, our boy smashed the man's face, telling him he had something to say, that he had already died once. And now, everything was going to be completely different. With his mana core already at the limit, the assassin began screaming louder and louder. Far from there, the fireworks show lit up the sky, and our boy had finally finished settling those problems. Those who posed a threat are no longer alive. Cecil looked back once more, realizing that his sister was still unconscious but safe. With no strength left in his body, he let his sword fall. At last, he could feel some relief. The problem was that he had pushed his body too far. The pain from his technique started to set in. Collapsed on the ground, the boy began to vomit. Back when he was a mercenary king in his past life, using 3 mana cores wasn't difficult. He refused to lose consciousness in a situation like this. Making his way to one of the nearby buildings, he came across some abandoned bodies. He knew about this from his past life, and based on what the assassin said, these must be his other victims. That was the son of Count Diggold. He and his guard had been taken out. It was all part of the conspiracy against Cecil's family. As soon as word spread about what happened there, a massive territorial war would erupt. Cecil realized he had to get rid of the bodies. Setting the building on fire, he was determined to change the course of events. With his sister on his back, he began making his way home, unaware that he was being watched by a mysterious figure, who vanished from sight the moment the boy continued on his path. The mysterious man is already being interrogated. The assassination had failed, and they wanted to know why he couldn't kill a single girl. He was trying to explain himself to those nobles, saying it was all Cecil Perdium's fault. The nobles found this version hard to believe, knowing the boy was considered a lost cause. He was notoriously known for being completely useless, so much so that no intel about him was even necessary for this mission, making the excuse unacceptable. But the assassin confirmed that the boy was completely different from what the rumors claimed. As an eyewitness to everything that had happened during that battle, he told those men that the boy was a completely different person. He also said that nothing should stand in the way of a territorial war between the two houses and pleaded for another chance. Several of them began to scold him, saying he would fail again and that they had wasted too much time on this. The more impatient ones wanted to get rid of the man immediately, until one voice rose above the others, ordering silence. The man, exuding a menacing presence, asked if the assassin truly wanted a second chance. He promised that this time he would completely eliminate Cecil Perdium. When asked how he would do it, he said it would be through a duel, and he already knew the perfect candidate. These words intrigued the nobles. The assassin said the candidate's name was Cain Loges, notoriously known for his strength and muscular build. He was unmatched in terms of brute strength despite his young age. There wasn't a single person in the north who could withstand his sword. He was also Cecil's cousin, so arranging the meeting between the two would be easy. Though still impatient, the nobles decided to listen to him. Meanwhile, the man who stood above all others warned the assassin that another failure would certainly be the last of his entire life. Back at our protagonist's family estate, he continued with his training. An elderly guard apologized for interrupting him. He came to deliver news about his meal, but he didn't realize something was flying toward him. It was one of Cecil's mana threads attached to a sword nearby. It was promptly pulled toward the boy and cleanly caught by his hands. After performing a few cuts in the air with it, Cecil realized it was enough. That's when he noticed he was no longer alone in the hall. Fergus was there, and apologizing once again, said the boy had been too absorbed in his training. Unable to hide his curiosity, he asked how the boy managed to do that. Holding the sword by just a thread, Cecil asked if he meant this, and the explanation was simple. It was a thread of mana, a technique he used daily in his past life, but one he still wasn't strong enough to fully unlock. The solution he found was to use only a single thread, due to his current mana limitations. Fergus said he had seen many things in his years as a knight, but that was truly impressive and unheard of. The old man knew the boy hadn't been able to use these kinds of abilities before, and had even started training late. He wanted to know how Cecil was now able to do all of this, and our boy asked if he was bringing news. To his surprise, Fergus said he had come to thank him. Not knowing what for, the night was clear. He was talking about what the boy had done for Helena's life. Cecil said he shouldn't be thanked, as he had only done what anyone else in his place would have done. Now they could leave and get something to eat. Because of what happened to Helena, the rest of the festival had been cancelled. That assassination attempt had been truly serious. Helena was sitting at the table, furious that no one believed her when she said her brother was the one who saved her. She told Cecil he should do something about it, but he didn't care either. people wouldn't believe anything he said. When Belinda found out that Nina's personal guards had tried to do such a thing, she was furious. Cecil had managed to change the first major event of his life. Helena was alive. He had prevented a large territorial war from breaking out, at least for now, but he was sure his enemies would continue trying. Alone, he wouldn't be able to persevere forever. He needed to build a force of his own. Thinking about this, he got distracted when a maid entered the room. To put his plans into motion, Cecil realized he needed to know how his family's finances were doing. What was served to him as a meal at that moment was just a piece of bread. Cecil looked at it confused. He asked Belinda why dessert was being served before the main course, and she told him they didn't have money to buy dessert. As if that weren't enough, outside the people were outraged. They were demanding compensation for their losses. Since the festival had been cut short, it caused major losses for the merchants. All of them were gathered in front of the castle gates. The townsfolk were furious, saying the rich didn't care about the suffering of others. Cecil went to the window to see what was happening, worried by all the shouting. Belinda had already expected something like this. She said the boy should have seen it coming too. Many merchants in that region relied on the festival's tourism to survive, and up until last year, they earned just enough to get by. With this year's festival interrupted, it was only natural for them to be angry. Cecil had no idea things were that bad in his territory. He realized that if things kept getting worse, people might resort to violence to solve their problems. Turning to Fergus, he asked what the soldiers were doing. They should be controlling the crowd. That's when the old man said they didn't have any soldiers. The few that remained were trying to rebuild what had been destroyed during the orc attack. The territory north of Perdium is overrun by barbarians, so they're constantly at war. To the east lies a monster-filled forest, very dangerous. That land lacks not only money, but also skilled labor. Cecil realized the situation was even worse than he thought. Grabbing Belinda by the shoulders, he said he needed to speak with her. He knew she was in charge of managing his allowance and said they should use that money to calm the merchants. That's when she revealed he wasn't receiving any allowance. Cecil asked why that was, and she explained the benefit had been cut off because he kept wasting money. The boy realized he had no funds available at the moment. He immediately tried to borrow money from her. But Belinda had nothing either. Now sitting on the windowsill, he began to reflect. Everything that could help him was either unavailable or in short supply. It would be hard to start anything without money. His immediate priority was to gather some resources. While thinking about what he could do, a soldier ran hurriedly through the castle corridors. He went straight to the young master, bringing news. As soon as he saw Ricardo panting heavily, Cecil asked what was going on to make him rush like that. The soldier said the news was bad. Cain was looking for him. For a brief moment, our boy had to try to remember who that name belonged to. Meanwhile, the commander of the guards was being beaten. His attacker struck him repeatedly without mercy, treating with contempt the man who held authority over the region's army. The final blow was so strong it crushed the commander's armor. Finally, our protagonist arrived at the scene, seeing the mess that had been made in that place. Cecil wasn't going to tolerate such things continuing to happen. That's when Cain noticed the person he'd been looking for had finally decided to show up. Standing before our protagonist, he tried to intimidate him. With false friendliness, he greeted his cousin, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Even after witnessing all of that, Cecil wasn't intimidated in the slightest, and finally remembered who that person was. He was the heir of Count Loges, who had been an ally of his family for many years, Cain Loges. In his past life, he was both his only friend and his enemy. Cain approached our boy calmly, stepping over the body of the soldier he had knocked down. Cecil asked Ricardo what had happened in that place. He said they went there because there was a public promotion going on, and they found Cain accompanied by one of his guards. They were asking if the rumors about the young master were true. Scovin began explaining exactly what happened. But before he could finish saying everything, Cain grabbed him by the face, thinking those words were nothing but lies. That's how everything had gone down in that place. Cain said his anger was justified because that old man was spreading lies about his cousin defeating orcs. So he decided the best course of action was to help the old soldier become clear-headed again. None of that would have happened if he hadn't chosen to tell those lies. Cecil realized that Cain wasn't there by coincidence. And besides, that was Cain's personality. He always treated Cecil as if he were his personal servant. Whenever he appeared on the lands of Cecil's family, he caused all kinds of trouble. No one was able to stop him. Even though he was troublesome, no one ever underestimated him. Practically the opposite of our protagonist, who had always been tormented by a sense of worthlessness. While Cain was constantly praised for his overwhelming confidence and charisma, Cecil was constantly compared to that pile of garbage. And the silence from our protagonist dragged on. Cain was waiting to be attacked, especially after calling the boy a liar in front of everyone. Not long ago, something had happened inside the Loges mansion. Someone came to Cain with a request to end the life of his cousin. And if he managed to do it, that person's master would provide full support to House Loges. Cain said ending that fool wasn't a problem. The issue was that he was also an heir to a noble family, so he couldn't just kill him without a reason. The man said that would be easy, as long as he was challenged to a duel. Just make it all look like an accident. He'd even accompany Cain in disguise, pretending to be his personal guard. An opportunity like that doesn't come around every day. Cain never thought someone would try to stop him from ending his cousin's life. But the truth is, he didn't care. He started to believe people were conspiring against Cecil before he could become an even greater threat. If that was the real motivation, he was eager to cooperate. Then, referring to our protagonist, he asked what he was waiting for. Cain found it strange that he was still silent. He should be bringing out everything he had prepared for him. Since the festival had been canceled, Cain wanted to celebrate to lift his mood, saying they always saw eye to eye on that subject. He coldly asked what his friend thought of the idea. Cecil stayed quiet for a few moments, until he finally remembered something, asking if Cain was referring to that. He used to be forced to bring drinks and women to his cousin whenever he passed through that city. He only did it back then because he was afraid of being beaten. He was tired of spending his own money to accommodate that braggart. Then he immediately remembered he no longer received an allowance. Our boy seemed to have an epiphany. Before his eyes was an excellent opportunity. That was the way fate had given him to make money. Kane was growing more and more impatient and called out Cecil by name. He told him to hurry up and get what was asked for because he didn't like to wait. Cecil said there was no problem, but there was something he needed to take care of first. He said his cousin owed him. Because of his completely different attitude, Cecil caused great confusion among those who were present. Kane asked what he owed him. Cecil began listing all the things he had already arranged for him. He said everything cost money and Kane owed him 1,000 gold coins. Kane insisted his cousin was exaggerating. That wouldn't be more than 100 coins. Not to mention Cecil used to do all that as a gesture of gratitude, a tribute of friendship. Cecil replied that that wasn't a model of friendship. He had just been acting like one. Then he said Kane should hurry up and pay him before he got crushed right there, because Cecil said he needed money. The people watching that exchange between the two began whispering among themselves. Ricardo was already terrified. He was certain the young master had completely lost his mind. Kane finally decided to stand up. He didn't like receiving that kind of response from Cecil, just because he had been too polite. He said Cecil was deluding himself, thinking he had gotten stronger, telling lies about defeating knights. That's why everyone in the north said he was a lost cause. Kane prepared to strike our protagonist, who was patiently waiting for him to approach, dodging the blow as if Kane's attack were moving in slow motion. Because of what he did, the people were stunned. Kane tried to strike again, but his fists couldn't land on the boy. On top of that, Cecil counterattacked, crushing one of that jerk's ribs. Kane felt so much pain he would have soiled himself if there had been anything in his intestines, and his suffering wasn't over yet. Kane was hit a second time. However, he managed to shield his face from that second blow. Even though he was blocked, Cecil remained calm, because Kane fell to the ground right after, unable to endure the force of that first hit. The assassin disguised as a knight rushed to him, asking if the boy was okay. Cecil acted like it was all a performance, telling his cousin to get up, since he had blocked the strike, and the disguised assassin asked how Cecil could be so bold. The onlookers who had gathered to see how things would unfold were asking themselves if Master Cecil had really struck down that mountain of muscle. Looking around, Cecil realized what they were aiming for. Now he knew exactly what their plan was. Kane asked his knight if his performance had been convincing. Receiving high praise, it had been excellent. Now they could blame Cecil, and he already had more than enough justification to challenge him to a duel. Thinking he would gain political support because of this, Kane was getting ready to issue the challenge. This was the perfect opportunity to rid himself of the pointless alliance his family had with Perdium. After pulling a glove from his pocket, he was about to propose the duel, saying the way he had been attacked was dishonorable, but he didn't get to finish his sentence. Because his face was struck by a glove, Cecil had challenged him first. Caught off guard, Kane was deeply irritated. Cecil said he had been insulted in front of his people, and he was the heir of that land. One of his knights had also been assaulted. He wouldn't let it slide, and asked if Kane was planning to back out. After burning with rage, Kane went silent, until he started smiling, saying his cousin really had always been a fool, but he never imagined he'd dig his own grave like that. Then he accepted the duel that had been proposed, saying he shouldn't be blamed if a boy loses his life in the process. Poor Kane, he has no idea he's about to be brutally beaten by the protagonist. Cecil immediately called for Ricardo. He told him to gather all the merchants who had been protesting at the castle gates that day, because there would be a great opportunity for them, one that could bring in a lot of profit. The sudden end of the festival had disrupted the entire town, but there were still a few tourists around the region. All of them were likely eager to spend their time and the money they had brought. Cecil was planning to hold a major event to entertain them. Standing atop an arena, he was surrounded by his people. A duel between him and his cousin was about to begin, stirring a wave of betting. Some were eager to see the useless heir get what he deserved. Outside, the merchants were also managing to sell some goods. Others took the chance to place bets. It was practically unanimous. Everyone betting believed Kane would win, and the mountain of muscle drove his sword into the ground, saying our protagonist was mocking that sacred duel. He decided to give him a warning. Even if he begged for mercy, his blade wouldn't stop. But our boy couldn't feel threatened by those words, because he knew very well that outcome was exactly what those bastards wanted. Now that the crowd had gathered around them, they could begin. That's when Kane's knight spoke up again. He didn't think this would turn into a real bet, so a few people asked what he meant by that. That's when the man handling the betting pool said no one had placed any money on the young master's victory. Cecil wasn't surprised at all. He hadn't had time yet to change his reputation, and people began saying that the useless one couldn't possibly win that duel. Betting on him was like investing in the impossible. Kane said that even the people of that land were against the heir of those lands. Someone suggested changing the bet. They wanted to know how long Cecil would be able to hold out. That's when a man placed a large sack of money on the table. It was the commander of the soldiers, saying he would bet on the young master's victory. Even though everyone doubted him, that gesture brought a smile to Cecil's face. That soldier wasn't the only one to place a bet. Helena and Belinda also came forward to bet on the young master's victory. This gesture truly surprised everyone, especially our protagonist, who had just asked both of them for a loan. The townspeople weren't expecting Helena to place a bet. Helena asked if that amount was enough, while Belinda said she tried to warn her about the risks of such a bet. The disguised assassin didn't seem pleased by any of it, while Kane claimed this was all just a waste of time. Cecil said that since he was the older of the two, it wouldn't be proper for him to attack first. Even so, he began drawing his own sword, showing he was ready to start the fight. He told Kane to come at him. The mountain of muscle assumed it was just provocation. Preparing to attack, he said no one cared whether Cecil was older or not. As soon as the referee began the match, Kane launched himself furiously at his opponent. That mountain of trembolone-fueled muscle came down on our protagonist like a meteor. Their blades clashed brutally. Cecil had to use every ounce of his strength to keep defending. Kane said there was no need to act like he had a reputation to uphold. And with a swift move of his sword, he nearly disarmed our boy. He also tried to strike him with the hilt, but Cecil dodged easily. Still, he had to avoid the follow-up attack as well. Because his cousin was wielding that sword like a giant club, the spectators realized something. Kane only needed to land one hit to win. Cecil, on the other hand, didn't look the least bit impressed by what was happening. Belinda was starting to get very worried and asked Helena if they should stop it, but the girl didn't seem concerned either. The assassin, however, knew it was too late. Once Kane's opponents started clashing blades with him, they fell right into his trap. After feeling that destructive power, they got scared and focused only on dodging. That caused them to tire quickly, creating an opening and leading to their final defeat. That's how Kane had won all his battles until now. He kept pressing, and our boy kept dodging everything. In the middle of the fight, he started mocking Cecil, saying he moved like a rat. But that wouldn't be enough to preserve his life. Kane tried to land a decisive blow, but his attack was blocked. Having changed the way he held the sword, he tried to hook Cecil with the guard, throwing Cecil's body high into the air. Everyone began to worry, and the assassin was sure the battle would be decided then. There was no way Cecil could avoid the damage from that fall. Not to mention, down in the arena, the mountain of muscle was waiting for him. Using his mana threads, Cecil said he had planned to take it easy. But his cousin had gone too far. Cecil landed safely on the ground, and moving swiftly, he closed the gap, now dangerously close to his opponent. Kane couldn't react. He looked back, trying to understand what had just happened. The assassin realized that Cecil had used his mana to strengthen his legs. That's how he closed the distance. It had been only a small demonstration of his power. Cecil said his cousin used that crude technique to intimidate his enemies, but now he was going to help him understand the truth. Kane began to feel insulted by such a comment. Preparing to attack again, he said his cousin wasn't capable of doing anything to him. And before he could deliver his blow, Cecil kicked the hilt of his sword. While neutralizing that attack, he also managed to slash Kane's arm. Before he hit the ground, Cecil landed several more strikes. All of it only served to make the mountain of muscle even angrier. Even though his blows were fast, he still couldn't land a single hit on Cecil. This time, our boy managed to immobilize his enemy's blade by stepping on it. That gave him the perfect opening to deliver a clean strike. His movement was faster than Kane's reaction, and that blade sliced across his neck. Cecil remains completely calm, while his enemy's body began to show all the wounds it had accumulated. Several people were watching that duel, and now they're surprised by the turn it had taken. It's hard to believe Cecil has improved so much. Some are beginning to think he might actually win. From Helena's posture, it's clear she never doubted for a second. Even the commander of the soldiers started to smile. While the disguised assassin was busy destroying yet another pair of underwear, Kane noticed that all of his wounds were superficial, realizing that Cecil had done it on purpose. A bit frightened, he began to wonder when that useless boy had managed to improve so much. Meanwhile, Cecil watched him with a touch of disdain, until he decided to throw away his own sword. As the blade dragged along the ground, Cecil said this would be fun as the gap between them was too great, saying he would continue the duel using only his bare hands. This time, Kane felt deeply insulted, while our protagonist felt it was time to teach a lesson to that mountain of muscle, and he would do it with his own hands, no matter what. Kane didn't like those words at all, and began questioning our protagonist about what exactly he planned to teach. Cecil stated that the mountain of muscle couldn't withstand his sword technique, so he decided to fight with just his hands, since his cousin always bragged about his strength. As further motivation, he said he would double their bet. If Cecil walked out victorious, he'd receive 2,000 gold coins. To the citizens of that city, this challenge was absurd. They didn't believe the young master could win unarmed. Even the disguised assassin was speechless, thinking this was making things far too easy. He realized this was the ideal setup. Fate was on their side. There's no way the musclehead could lose under these conditions. And the man responsible for the bets didn't waste any time, immediately calling everyone to wager on this new phase of the fight. This greatly excited those who were watching the duel. But after witnessing a bit of Cecil's strength, people were becoming a bit more confident that the young master might actually surprise everyone. Kane ended up feeling greatly underestimated, which only made him angrier. Cecil assured him that his juice-loving cousin could use his sword if he wanted to. And by then, he was completely out of control, taking off the coat he had been wearing. Like a wild beast unleashed, Kane charged our protagonist with his sword. Belinda was extremely nervous about all of this, wishing the young master would be a bit more cautious and use his sword. Kane was entirely driven by the madness of the moment, believing this time he would win. Cecil, on the other hand, was certain that what his cousin needed most right now was an unforgettable beating. Even though the attack had been fast, it wasn't enough to hit our protagonist, who used that opportunity to move in closer and closer. His steps in the arena were extremely light. He managed to circle his cousin with ease, striking his body every time an opportunity arose. And this time, he wasn't going to hold back when hitting that idiot, taking advantage of one of those openings to land a powerful punch to his cousin's jaw. The result was exactly what you'd expect. Kane's head was thrown backward, almost knocked off his own body. Trying to recover from that blow, he had to lean on the ground, completely disoriented. Kane couldn't understand how his opponent was moving faster than him. Now that the giant had been brought down through sheer force, the people were amazed at the young master's skill. Maybe he really could win. Cecil ordered the mountain of muscle to get back up, saying they were only just getting started. And once again in this battle, Kane was consumed with rage, charging like a furious beast toward our protagonist. He tried to unleash upon Cecil every sword move he had ever learned. Not only did none of them land, but he also began to think that our protagonist didn't even have the courage to look him in the eyes. He had always done what he was told, every time the musclehead had come to his lands. Now that same boy was the one beating him down so brutally. Cain believed he had to defeat him right then and there in order to secure his family's future. But the fight had taken another turn. One moment, Cecil was landing brutal hits. The next, Cain was taking even worse beatings. With his face completely disfigured, he still couldn't understand what was happening. That's when Cecil grabbed him by the hair, lifting the face of that mountain of muscles. Our protagonist said he felt sorry for his cousin's father, because the Count was one of the few people who helped the Perdium family when they were on the verge of ruin, all due to the friendship he had with our protagonist's father. Even in the face of such a noble gesture, his son is completely different. That seemed to awaken something in the boy's memories. Many years ago, he had questioned his father about why he was sending aid to the Perdium family. They were also going through difficult times, and the boy didn't understand why his father would do all that for the sake of friendship if his friend's territory was doomed. It was something the boy was completely incapable of understanding. His father was already heading to that territory once again. He tried to ask the Count not to go. His father was the only one helping those people. All the other nobles were ignoring the situation. In response to his son's questioning, the Count said there was no special reason for doing it, because they were friends. That's what the mountain of muscle ended up remembering. Our protagonist's hand was about to crush his face once again. But unlike the previous times, Cain simply closed his eyes. He didn't show any reaction. Surprised that he wasn't hit this time, Cecil said he hoped Cain had learned his lesson. Showing that his hand was extended to help him up, he asked his cousin to take it. For a brief moment, Cain tried to understand that gesture. Bowing his head, he realized he had been defeated in more ways than he could describe, announcing to everyone present that he had lost that duel. Even though the outcome had become predictable halfway through that beating session, everyone was still deeply shocked. Our protagonist's victory began to be celebrated because it didn't make any sense at all. Helena, Belinda, and the soldiers were also happy with the victory. The disguised assassin walked up to Cain, visibly furious. He didn't understand how that mountain of muscles had chosen to lose the fight over a small setback. He wasn't supposed to act like that. But turning his face away, Cain said he had no further business with that man. That only made the assassin even more outraged. That's when Cecil decided to approach him. He clearly had some business to settle at that moment. The assassin had no idea what he was trying to resolve. Loud enough for everyone to hear, Cecil said he would buy drinks and food for everyone there in Cain's place, which caused great embarrassment for the man. He said the offer was ridiculous and asked our protagonist to take it back immediately. But the boy grabbed him by the shoulder. It seemed the assassin still hadn't realized his situation. Cecil said that's what he owed for losing that duel, and he was sure the man carried a lot of money, which he owed to our protagonist. A total of 3,000 gold coins, which he would definitely not forget to pay. Cecil used all his persuasive power to make it clear to the man that he strongly recommended not trying to run away without paying his debt, and the assassin realized his situation had become quite complicated. As soon as he agreed to those terms, Cecil made his way out of the arena. The next day, our protagonist was in his room. He placed a large chest on the table. As soon as he opened it, he realized it was overflowing with gold coins. That might be enough for him to hire a small army of mercenaries. The amount was generous, and it would take some time before he could earn money consistently, but Cecil knew life wouldn't wait for him, and he had big plans ahead. Belinda and Helena watched with great interest. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, Cecil asked what they wanted. Helena wanted to know what her brother was going to do with all that money. Cecil asked if she wanted some, but the girl said she was just asking a question. Belinda said the answer was pretty obvious. She already knew where the young master was going to spend his money. Amelia's birthday was coming up, and she imagined the young master had done all this because of that occasion. He was going to buy her a very expensive gift. While the two girls argued about how he was going to spend the money, the boy didn't say a word because he got absolutely no idea he had a fiancé. Belinda said he shouldn't act shy. They both knew he was just pretending not to remember he had a fiancé. Helena said it was the daughter of Count Leopold, and that he should remember. Finally, his memories clicked into place. He knew exactly who that woman was, Amelia Leopold, loved by her people for her sweet and humble personality. But that's just a facade, hiding a woman who will soon be known as a witch for starting a rebellion. She also allied herself with Count Delphine to bring down the Perdium family, and to our protagonist, she is nothing but a traitor. Realizing he could accomplish many things now, he began to smile. He asked Belinda when her father would return, and she said it might take another week. The boy realized that was more than enough time. Standing up from his chair, he said he would pay a visit to the Leopold territory. Belinda pointed out that his fiancé's birthday hadn't arrived yet and asked why he was going so early. The boy didn't even try to hide the truth. He said he was going there to get more money. Amelia always has a spider landing on her face. After placing a pair of shoes on the ground, she asked that child to wear them. She was doing all of this among the poor, which is why they looked up to her. The child was clearly embarrassed by the gesture. The girl said that if anyone should walk barefoot in her lands, it should be her. She ordered her guards to arrange food and shelter for all those people. Immediately, they began unloading the carriages. There were many supplies there. It didn't take long before all those people started thanking her. After that populist gesture, she returned to her mansion. And even though she was engaged to another man, someone was far too entertained washing her feet. This man was Bernaf, one of her knights, who said she had done very well that day. Amelia said her father had always forced those people to show obedience to him. But people are much more cooperative with those who help them. The knight said that the people were on her side, and that would definitely help when the next successor was chosen. But she was thinking of something else. With a dominating and rather depraved gesture, she stepped on her knight's face. asking him what had happened with the duel he fought against the strongest swordsman in the north. The knight apologized, saying he had lost on purpose to avoid drawing too much attention to himself. Otherwise, it could have exposed everything he was doing for her. While caressing the feet of that woman, he said that it wasn't yet time to reveal his claws to the world. As soon as he finished speaking, he began kissing her feet like a lover. My God, our protagonist doesn't even know, but he was carrying a heavy burden over his head. The girl said he was right, and she had also done a lot for him. Then she lifted her knight's head, telling him he couldn't afford to be weak under any circumstance. Asking about the company, he said there was no need to worry about anything. Everything the Perdium family was buying to rebuild what had been destroyed by the monsters was coming from their company. They were collecting all the funds that Count Leipold sent each year to support them. In addition, they were also recruiting all the soldiers and knights who had deserted from that territory, many of them highly skilled from constant battles against monsters and barbarians. Amelia said the company needed to appear as a completely ordinary merchant group. They couldn't be exposed yet. Then their conversation was interrupted by the butler. The knight said Amelia was resting and asked who had given the man permission to enter the garden unannounced. The butler said he brought news from the gates. Cecil was there to make a visit. Amelia was surprised. She wanted to know what that useless boy was doing there. The butler started stuttering and sweating a lot as he hadn't yet delivered the full message. Cecil said he had come because he wanted to discuss something about her company. They went to the meeting room, and the woman who wanted to place a heavy burden on our protagonist's head was now sitting across from him. Cecil greeted her in a friendly manner. The woman said nothing, and the cat on her lap seemed to dislike the guest. She said it was very rude of him to visit without notice. Cecil replied that since her birthday was approaching, he had come to give her a gift. He showed her a flower he had bought from a company nearby and said he had decided to start buying from them going forward. He was trying to remember the name of it. It was the Axiom Company. Amelia was quite suspicious of all those words, saying she wasn't sure what Cecil was trying to imply. And since she had already received his gift, she said she would be ending the meeting. Our protagonist wasn't pleased with her attitude in calling his, until then, Fancy by her full name. He ordered her to sit down once more. He ended up letting a bit of his mana leak into the air, sending chills down her spine. Amelia couldn't explain that pressure after all. That fool couldn't even look her in the eye before, and now he seemed far too confident. Cecil said he would get straight to the point. He needed money and asked her for 10,000 gold coins. The girl was truly confused by this. She hadn't expected her fiancé to come all the way there ask for a loan. He clearly had no shame. And she asked if he had come on his father's orders. Cecil replied no, he came of his own will. Besides, he knew she had no intention of marrying him, and he knocked over the tea she had been drinking onto the floor. That made her absolutely furious. Cecil said that if she managed to succeed her father, she could marry whomever she wanted, even the guard standing on the other side of the door, and it would be a real shame if someone found out she was assembling an army for the succession battle. After the boys said that, the cat went completely wild, almost lunging toward our protagonist. Amelia said he should be more careful with his words, and that he shouldn't say such things even as a joke. Cecil assured her he would keep it secret, for now, unless he left there empty-handed. Amelia said that wouldn't be the case. Then she called for her personal knight. Bernaf entered with the confidence only a man who is number 2 in a woman's life possesses. Greeting our protagonist, he said it had been a while since they last met. Cecil knew the basics about that man. He was strong enough to challenge the most powerful swordsman in the north. The boy said that if he died there, it could spark a territorial war, and asked if that was what she wanted. Amelia had everything planned. She'd simply claimed that Lunatic had attacked her guards and was defeated. That's the version everyone would hear. Then she ordered her knight to kill our protagonist. And with the determination only a man who's completely whipped can possess, he said he would obey. Cecil realized he had no other choice. He'd have to get serious too. The two were just about to begin their battle. He noticed that his enemy's gaze was too confident. That's when he realized there might be a weapon hidden in that room. Inside one of the suits of armor, in fact, there was an infiltrated assassin who tried to attack our protagonist. With a swift movement, the assassin managed to stab into the sofa where Cecil had been sitting. But Cecil reacted quickly, escaping the couch and avoiding the surprise attack. Taking advantage of the assassin's body being midair, he struck his stomach with a kick, sending that fool flying through the window. Bernaf and Amelia could hardly believe what they'd just seen. Cecil hadn't expected there to be an assassin in the room and provoking his fiancée. He said she had just put on a show to seem polite, but had always planned to ambush him. Saying they were terrible hosts, Cecil charged for the knight. Their swords finally clashed. Cecil asked if all the knights of House Leipold were sellouts with no honor. The knight said Cecil had been rude first. He'd arrived unannounced and made Amelia uncomfortable. And to the knight, someone like that didn't deserve to be treated with respect. Surprising our protagonist, he managed to grab Cecil's sword arm, creating an opening to deliver a piercing strike. But not only did Cecil dodge the blow, he used his posture to surprise the knight with a high kick, then followed up with a strike to the knight's chest, strong enough to knock him off balance. That way, he was able to gain distance from his opponent. The knight was thinking that the rumors didn't make sense. Cecil was supposed to be a useless boy with no skill at all. But after exchanging a few blows with him, he was sure of one thing. Cecil was far from just an amateur. Amelia was already growing uncomfortable, and she asked Bernaf what he was doing, since his opponent was just a boy. Showing irritation, she told him to hurry up and get the boy's head, if he truly wanted to be her sword. That was when Bernaf remembered he was just a tool to Amelia, and he loved that role. Gripping his sword firmly, he assured her he wouldn't disappoint her. Now prepared to endure another round of attacks from our protagonist, Cecil asked if that knight was giving him orders, because if that was the case, he should know his place. Bernaf said he was only being polite, but since the boy insisted otherwise, he would do as Cecil wished and began to cautiously approach our protagonist. And in the blink of an eye, he closed the distance completely, ready to deliver a piercing strike. Cecil managed to dodge by a hair that was truly dangerous. In addition to noticing his enemy's speed, his face was superficially wounded by that thrust, and that knight still hadn't finished showing the extent of his abilities. The two began exchanging blows repeatedly, at incredible speed. Amelia was watching everything from the sidelines. She couldn't understand how her spoiled fiancé was holding his own against a trained knight. Even if it was surprising, she believed the outcome of that duel could only go one way, because her knight was still the one pressing the attack. However, in his last move, Cecil managed to lock his blade using the guard of his sword, landing a strike that almost cut the knight's neck, but that left his sword too far out of reach. And for the fourth time in this story, someone managed to block an obviously sharp sword with their bare body, protected only by a cotton or maybe linen. Sure, let's not forget that Cain once held the blade like it wasn't sharp at all. Bizarre. Anyway, the knight took advantage of the situation to strike, but missed once again. Cecil told him he had already seen that move before. Knowing his opponent's attack pattern, he was able to surprise him. The boy was shifting direction rapidly, but his opponent maintained his stance, avoiding being struck by the boy's kick. The knight said the counterattack wouldn't work twice. Then threw our protagonist's body toward the ground, Cecil braced for impact, and the impact came. The force wasn't gentle at all. Now the knight's blade had a clear path to pin our protagonist to the floor, but at the last second, Cecil disrupted his opponent's move, changing the sword's trajectory. Immediately after that, he managed to put some distance between them, but he had lost his sword in the process. Cecil realized that the knight was using mana to withstand his attacks. Bernaf said the boy was nothing like the rumors, and admitted you only really know someone after fighting them. He realized that Cecil's swordsmanship came from experience, not formal training. He figured the boy had fought so much against barbarians that he picked up their techniques. Throwing the boy's sword far away, he said that technique might work in the chaos of the battlefield, but not against him. The boy's talent would only carry him this far. Cecil saw that everything was just as he had imagined. This opponent truly was formidable. His thrusts were fast and consistent, throwing off the boy's sense of distance. The height difference was also working against him. This wasn't an opponent he should be facing right now, but the boy knew he didn't have much time left, so he started using his mana threads. With a quick movement, he was already pulling his sword back into his hand, without the knight noticing. By the time Bernaf finally noticed the mana thread, the sword was already flying toward him. Luckily for the knight, the sword's guard hit his head. If it had been the blade, it would have been over. Cecil took advantage of the opening to close the distance with his opponent. Using the momentum of the movement, he landed a knee to the knight's face. Bernaf, dazed by being struck twice, had no idea what had just happened. Amelia fell into despair. She realized her knight was being defeated, because now with his opponent wounded and confused, Cecil had a clear path to strike with his blade. The next attack was devastating. The knight barely managed to block it, but he was being harshly overwhelmed by the force of that impact. As soon as he regained his balance, he used his strength to throw the boy away. But Cecil remained completely focused on the fight and was already prepared to charge again. Bernaf realized things were getting dangerous and told Amelia to leave the room immediately, as he could no longer guarantee her safety. The knight had lost his patience. He wouldn't hold back anymore. Cecil said he'd been waiting for exactly that. It had been a while since he faced such an interesting opponent. Amelia picked up her cat and quickly left the room. But she was truly furious, feeling humiliated by what her fiancé had done. She also wanted to know who had leaked information about the company to him. There was no way he could know so much. Thinking about the recent rumors about him, she figured maybe he'd gotten lucky or someone had exaggerated the story. But after seeing him beat up her knight, she was sure it was all true. With that in mind, her expression grew increasingly cold. She was going to look for the knights she had hired. As soon as she reached the room where they were supposed to be, she found only bodies lying on the floor and a mysterious person. It was a woman, and she turned to Amelia, realizing she had arrived at that place. It was Belinda, who politely said it had been a while since they last saw each other. Amelia knew she was one of the Perdium family's maids, and before she could even react, she had been subdued by Belinda, who held a knife to her neck. Amelia realized she had become a hostage in her own territory. Belinda hadn't expected her to still have that disgusting spider in her mouth, so she pulled it out with her hands. She said that during the engagement ceremony, she overheard a conversation between the counts. Amelia had been teased by her brothers with spiders, so she turned against them by raising her own spiders. Maybe she was trying to overcome that trauma, or maybe she was just behaving foolishly. Either way, Belinda said it didn't suit her, then crushed the spider under her foot. After doing that, she told her to follow the orders she was about to receive. Cecil was still in the middle of his battle with that knight. The air in that room had changed completely. That was definitely a significant amount of mana. Bernaf asked if the boy had really called him an interesting opponent. That's something a mercenary would say. He said he was sick of the boy calling himself a noble, even worse, thinking he was on the same level as Amelia. Cecil, come on. You're the noble here. The one who doesn't understand his place is the knight. He's just a knight. The two were about to clash again. Moving like lightning bolts, their swords collided once more. The knight said the boy was an insult to nobility, launching a series of rapid thrusts at him. Cecil had to push his skills to the limit just to keep up with his opponent's precision. Because of those consecutive strikes, he was under heavy pressure. Indeed, that knight wasn't holding back anymore. Making a quick motion with his blade, Cecil told his opponent to slow down, managing to parry his last attack and preparing a counterstrike aimed straight for the knight's head. But his speed was truly impressive. He repositioned his hand quickly, blocking the protagonist's strike. With great skill, he was parrying all of Cecil's attacks. Even though our protagonist had taken the offensive, he still hadn't landed a hit, and the knight said he had a warning for him. Cecil's next attack would be his last, because he had managed to land his blade into the boy. After the blood sprayed through the air, Bernaf was stunned by what he saw. Cecil had managed to shift his shoulder at the last moment, as if he had predicted where the strike would land. He returned to combat at the same pace as before. The knight realized he couldn't lower his guard for even a second during this fight, but he was determined to defeat the boy. Before their blades could clash again, the knight surprised him with a kick to the ribs, saying that this was the difference between him and someone who only wields a sword for fun. The knight's physical advantage was truly impressive, and just as Cecil had imagined, it was quite fun. His opponent continued abusing his speed, closing the gap between them and blocking every physical strike. Cecil thought he couldn't beat this man, as it felt like his opponent's blade was always just an inch away from his own. To win, he needed more mana. That was the only thing holding him back in this fight. Cecil realized he would have to end it with the next strike. As he gathered his power, he became aware of something his opponent didn't know: his secret mana technique. Once he released the third core, his speed increased drastically. He managed to block the knight's attack while trapping his sword with a guard of his own. Making a lateral movement, he shifted the trajectory of the enemy's weapon. By the end of the motion, his opponent was completely disarmed. It was then that Bernaf realized our protagonist was truly dangerous, because he had amplified his mana power mid-battle, and the final blow was coming, until Amelia's voice called for them to stop. The tip of our protagonist's sword was touching the knight's forehead. His life was only spared because of that intervention. Amelia said she would hand over the 10,000 gold coins and ask them to leave the place. Cecil said this had been unnecessarily difficult. She should have handed over the money when he was still being polite. He finally pulled his blade away from the knight's head. Belinda asked if that wasn't a bit much for a lover's quarrel, and the boy said it was just a misunderstanding. However, he had some very bad news for Amelia. Now they wanted 20,000 gold coins. That place was completely wrecked, and several of Amelia's soldiers had been defeated. While the cat ate under the sofa, the girl began breaking things in a furious rage. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her knight was apologizing, saying the boy was much stronger than he had expected, and that he had failed to gather information on the enemy. Amelia realized that Cecil had changed a lot. Bernaf asked if he should report this to Duke Delphine, but all she did was slap her servant across the face. She told him to watch his words and asked if he understood how powerful the Duke really was. If anyone found out what had happened there, they'd be cast out. She had only allied with him without her father's consent because of the promise of funding for the rebellion she was planning. That's why she must help him bring down the Perdium family. If any of that information leaks, her brothers could have her killed. If they discover the company, they might uncover the pact she made with the Duke. That's why Cecil must die immediately. The knight said he understood her orders. When asked how Cecil escaped, the knight said the boy had several small wounds across his body and a larger one on his shoulder. Since he had used a lot of energy, it would take some time before he could recover. The problem was that if they couldn't act stealthily, they wouldn't be able to use the Knights of House Leipold for this mission. That's why she would use the ones who had been in training all this time. The knight knew she was talking about the wild cats. They were the elite among the orphans she had trained. After pointing to a place on the map, she ordered that the 12 most skilled in mana be sent to that location. As soon as he saw the marked location, the knight understood everything. That canyon was the only passage connecting the two regions, ideal for eliminating someone in secret. The knight said he would prepare his squad. Amelia wanted Cecil to pay with his life for what he had done to her. Our boy was already in the carriage, and he felt something strange. He thought it might be his fiancée's lingering hatred. His personal knight looked worried and asked if the young master was all right, but Cecil assured Fergus that everything was fine. The wound wasn't too deep and his body was okay, even though he may have overdone it a little. Those 20,000 gold coins were more than enough to rebuild his territory. He had basically bought himself a few years. It would have been great if he had finished her off too, but that would have triggered a territorial war, and he couldn't let his grudge put his family in danger. They were already too busy dealing with the barbarians to the north, so he needed to plan his moves carefully. Amelia would have trouble organizing an attack, because he now knew about her company, and this time he would make sure to use that knowledge to the fullest. Belinda was watching our boy with intense curiosity, saying things had played out exactly as he had planned. She had been ordered to take out the guards if she heard any sounds of battle coming from that room, and to take Amelia hostage as soon as she left the area. Cecil wasn't impressed with the outcome of his plan. He said he gave the same order to Fergus. That's when he felt something very strange in his body. Showing signs of pain, the knight and Belinda became extremely concerned. Cecil knew it was a side effect of having unlocked the third core. It wasn't as bad as last time, but he couldn't let this keep happening. He needed to find a way to increase his mana flow. Without him noticing, Belinda was already checking his vital signs. With a needle in hand, she said his mana flow was very tangled. She made a few precise punctures, and the boy realized she really knew what she was doing. But it gave him a strange sensation, as if he were about to vomit. When he tried, all that came out of his mouth was a large burst of steam, and he felt his body recover slightly. Only someone with very refined mana control could do that. He knew it was his mother who had recruited Belinda. She was certainly not an ordinary person. Even though he'd known her his whole life, she was surrounded by mystery. Cecil was now wondering what made someone so powerful powerful stay in that small town. And with the way things were heading, it wasn't bad at all to have powerful people around him, because this was only the beginning. The carriage continued toward their territory. Belinda said she believed in our protagonist, so she would help him with whatever she could. That's why she wanted to know why he had gone to Amelia to ask for that much money. Cecil said he was in need of it, and the only person he knew was Amelia. His answer was so simple that it left his companions shocked. Belinda couldn't believe he broke off the engagement because of this and asked if he knew what could happen if the Count heard about it. Cecil assured her that his fiancée wouldn't be able to tell the Count, and he asked Belinda if she really believed him. With great difficulty, she said yes, but she wanted to know what he was going to use the money for, since they all took a risk because of him. Cecil told her about the forest of monsters, which left the woman frozen. The boy guaranteed that he was going to take possession of that land. Fergus said the young master couldn't do that. Everyone who had tried before had failed. Cecil asked what he had requested of the knight before they entered the castle. He hesitated a bit before responding. The knight said the person they were looking for was in that place, but he looked a little different. Fergus wanted to know if he truly desired that person. Cecil said that as long as he was alive, that was enough, and that they were going there. Belinda said they needed to return to the territory. He couldn't keep walking around injured like that. Cecil asked her if she truly believed Amelia would allow them to leave her land after what they had done. Belinda believed in their abilities. She said Fergus was also an exceptional knight. Cecil liked her words, but told her that this wasn't her responsibility. She was a different kind of warrior. He needed someone capable of handling the front lines, and that person was the one they were about to meet now. The boy knocked a few times on the door. Belinda, looking at the place, said it seemed to have been abandoned for a long time, but Fergus assured her this was the right address. Finally, the door opened. An old man received them there. He asked who those visitors were. Everyone except our protagonist was surprised by his appearance. Belinda asked if he was really looking for this person, as he looked far more decrepit than someone capable of standing on the front lines. But the boy was sure that this was the person he had been looking for. Returning inside his home, the old man said he must be just a bored noble, and not wanting to waste his time, told them all to leave. Cecil said that he was the former captain of the Ratatosk mercenary group Gillian. The old man looked back, concerned, and our boy said he had been looking forward to meeting him. Fergus was speechless for a moment. Ricardo followed his reaction. They both knew that mercenary group. The Rathatos gained a lot of notoriety because every member could wield any type of weapon. They disbanded in the past, but their bravery and courage were known among all knights, and the captain of that great group was Gillian. Our protagonist said he had come especially to see him. As a sign of his displeasure, the old man hurled an axe toward our protagonist. The weapon passed intentionally just centimeters from his head. His knights and Belinda were terrified by it. Gillian hadn't expected to meet people who knew about his past. Knowing that this man was potentially dangerous, Cecil's companions were ready to defend him. Gillian didn't seem to have much patience and asked what they wanted by coming there. Belinda asked the young master to step back, as that old man was surely very dangerous. Eternal punishment was all our protagonist said, and it seemed to capture the old man's attention. He said he knew a cure for the disease that was causing his daughter so much suffering. Now that he had shared that, Cecil wanted to know if he had earned the man's interest. The symptoms of the disease were an intense fever and coughing up blood, along with red markings that appeared on the skin resembling petals. It got its name because those afflicted by it looked like prisoners, doomed to eternal punishment. Already inside the old man's home, they saw that his daughter had been struck by this illness and was suffering greatly. There was nothing he could do to ease her pain. But as soon as he saw the girl, Cecil realized there was still time. It wasn't too late. In his past life, he had tried to recruit Gillian, but arrived too late. The man had lost all hope when his daughter died. And judging by the state of that house, it seemed he had spent everything in trying to find a cure for the girl. Only his weapons remained. The girl was in so much pain that she begged her father for her life to end soon. Cecil began to prepare himself, knowing he couldn't waste time there. Before he could act, Belinda grabbed him by the shoulder. She said the boy needed to leave that room. Moreover, this cannot be solved with strength. Not even the priest's blessing is capable of curing it. She believes the boy can't do anything either. But ignoring her advice, Cecil said he could fix that girl. Seeing that Belinda was very agitated, he reminded her that she had already said she decided to believe in him. Now she was speechless, bound by her own promise. Knowing what he needed to do, Cecil handed her a list of things that needed to be gathered. All those herbs were to be brought to him. Belinda seemed intrigued by that combination of remedies. For mercenaries who wander the land without a place to return to, knowledge is essential for survival. And in the coming years, a cure would be found for the eternal suffering. It became a topic of gossip for a while because the combination of ingredients was very simple to make. That's why he still remembers it so clearly. The only problem is that they also need one fairly expensive ingredient, the fairy's blessing. Cecil began to prepare everything he had gathered. He placed all the herbs into a jar, then poured some liquor over them. With the container sealed, he mixed everything thoroughly, then let it rest for a while, because the rest of the ingredients still had to be added. Finally, a small portion of the remedy could already be used. Presenting it to the old mercenary, the boy said he should give it to his daughter. She immediately drank it while in her father's arms. The relief on her face was nearly instant. The marks began to fade. As her skin returned to normal, the effectiveness of the medicine was confirmed. Unanimously, everyone who witnessed it was impressed by the remedy's effect. The marks on the girl's skin had disappeared. Gillian tried to speak to his daughter, asking if that medicine had really worked. Cecil was relieved the medicine was as effective as he had hoped, and the old mercenary looked at him, wanting to know how it had worked, since divine power hadn't been able to heal his daughter. Cecil said the kind of power can't heal everything. It only strengthens the body and its regenerative abilities. It's different from cutting the evil at the root. Gillian was struggling to accept what he had seen. Approaching the boy, he asked if his daughter really could be cured. Cecil said that within a month or two, she should be completely healthy again. Faced with that, the old mercenary had no choice. except to bow before that noble. Then he asked what Cecil wanted from him since he had clearly come to his house with a purpose. The problem was that all he had left was this useless body. Even so, the mercenary said that if the boy needed him to be his dog or his slave, he'd be either. Cecil said he needed the former captain of the mercenaries. Gillian noticed something interesting in the boy's eyes, and he began to wonder what kind of ambition was hiding in the depths of those eyes. The first thing the old mercenary did was grab his own hair. With a simple swing of his axe, he rid himself of the excessive length, letting his hair fall to the ground. That alone was enough to shock the boy's companions. It was as if that man had transformed. He was a completely different person. Gillian began walking through his house. He asked if Cecil had anyone else outside or if they were waiting for someone to arrive. The boy confirmed it was just them. Gillian grabbed one of his spears and asked if there was anyone holding a grudge against the boy. Cecil confirmed and said there would be more in the future. Now the old mercenary knew what to do. With a quick and powerful motion, he threw the spear out of his house. It traveled through the air toward the forest, finding its target within seconds. Since the spear was tied to a rope, Gillian began to pull it back. The strength of that man was truly impressive. He had just fished out an assassin hiding in the trees. The wound he inflicted wasn't fatal, and the mercenary grabbed him by the neck. Getting straight to the point, he asked who had sent him there. But the assassin refused to give any information. Gillian asked what Cecil wanted to do, and our protagonist said he already knew who had sent the assassin. He hadn't planned to act on it today, but he had no other choice. Before he could draw his sword, a mercenary stopped him. He said he would take care of it in his place. After all, the man's neck was still within his reach. Finally, the assassin was finished off, and the mercenary was now demonstrating his loyalty. Belinda noticed that he hadn't hesitated for a moment to kill. She didn't understand why the young master had chosen someone so dangerous. Gillian was now kneeling before Lord Cecil Perdium, and said that from that day forward, his life belonged to him. Our boy said he was looking forward to working with his new subordinate, thinking that he was now one step closer to rebuilding his territory. It didn't take long for the assassins to find out that one of their scouts had been killed. They seemed surprised by the news. Their leader began to demand silence. He told them to speak in hushed voices. His name was Vigo. One of his subordinates apologized for what he had done. According to the information they received, Cecil shouldn't have been capable of defeating a scout. Now it was uncertain if the fault lay with the man who died or with faulty intel, until one of them said that Gillian had joined them. The leader of the assassins grabbed his subordinate by the neck. He wanted to know if that was really true, and the subordinate said he had seen it with his own eyes. Vigo seemed to recognize the old mercenary and realized that he had started to move again, his former leader. Our protagonist's carriage continued moving forward through the night, with Gillian guiding the horses. Belinda was complaining that it had become very cramped inside. She wanted to know if the old man really needed to bring all those weapons. It almost seemed like he was going to sell them. They had to buy another carriage just because of it. Cecil said they'd need a second carriage to carry Rachel anyway, since she was still recovering from her illness. Behind them were Ricardo and the others. Cecil said all those weapons would be very useful, so she needed to be patient. The most important thing now was that they crossed that canyon safely. Belinda asked if that spy they had defeated had really been sent by Amelia. Cecil was sure of it, so she realized things could become very complicated from that point on. The mask he was wearing symbolized the Wildcats, a very powerful guild from the Leopold region. Our boy hadn't even known about the resistance of that group, but they specialized in smuggling, assassination, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. They were despicable people who did the dirty work. Their members were also physically strong. Many of them had once been mercenaries. Cecil asked if she had always worked in her family's castle, and how she knew so much. Belinda said she had done a few things before working with them. She also said those assassins were very persistent, so they had to remain cautious. To her surprise, our boy said it would be fine, because they had Gillian with them. The carriage continued along its path in the darkness of the forest. Without realizing it, they were heading straight into a trap. Their pursuers were already approaching from the flanks of the carriage. Gillian managed to hear that peculiar sound. Two assassins were already preparing to strike him with their blades. Realizing he had entered an ambush, he reached for his axe. He was able to block both attacks with great ease. His mastery of weapons was truly exceptional. He managed to lock the blades of his attackers, and reacting quickly, he turned them into people with permanent disabilities. But the mercenary didn't stop there. He also ended their lives. The carriage moved on, leaving behind the bodies of those who tried to stop them. Two other assassins cut some ropes. That triggered a massive trap. Tree trunks were falling from above. Belinda was terrified. If they were hit, they would surely be crushed. The mercenary had to act quickly to command the horses, stopping them from continuing forward. The path ahead had been blocked. Cecil had already expected they might fall into an ambush while trying to escape. Now their caravan was surrounded by dangerous assassins. Their leader began speaking to Gillian, the former leader of the Ratatosk mercenaries. But the old mercenary didn't seem to recognize the man's voice. Virgo kept approaching, saying he was a coward who disbanded the group because of his daughter. Gillian stepped down from the carriage, saying he didn't know what that man was talking about. Virgo said he ended up living a life he never wanted because of him, saying Gillian had grown so old he couldn't even remember what he had done in life. Even if he did remember, the old mercenary remained silent. Virgo believed he was only pretending not to recognize him and decided he would force him to remember, ordering his assassins to attack immediately. Cecil asked if he needed help, but the mercenary said it was fine. It seemed the man's grudge was directed solely at him. Surrounded by enemies, Gillian assured them he could handle them all by himself. A single strike from his axe was enough to slice several of them in half. The assassins began mocking him, saying he was just an arrogant old man. But the mercenary was already prepared to continue the fight, blocking attacks while ending lives. Every assassin who got close enough to him was dismembered and killed immediately after. There was nothing they could do against that old warrior, and he continued turning his enemies into puzzle pieces. Virgo realized the strength of that man had not left his body, but he had a strategy for that. He told his men to split up and attack from both sides. Gillian immediately mounted one of the horses. That move left his enemies very confused. Riding atop the horse, he took up a large axe. As he spun the weapon over his head, he began charging toward the group of assassins. Gillian was about to do what he did best, remove body parts with his weapons. The assassins realized they couldn't get close to him, so they decided to target the horse. But they hadn't counted on the old mercenary's agility. Using an axe attached to the end of a rope, he sliced down several more. Belinda, watching all this, began to feel very uncomfortable. This old mercenary was truly brutal. One of the assassins tried to surprise him from above. Gillian blocked his approach using a shield. Virgo seemed like a bitter man, saying his life had been ruined because of that old mercenary, and now he would personally end his life. As soon as he got past the shield, the assassin attacked the poor horse. Gillian had to dismount so he wouldn't be crushed when the animal fell. That created a major opening for his enemy, who moved in, ready to strike. But the old mercenary blocked the attack with his axe. While striking the man with his shield, he said he was no longer the leader of Ratatosk. The strength of that non-lethal blow was enough to send the assassin flying several meters. Slowly getting up, the man asked if Gillian truly wasn't the leader. He said he couldn't be fooled, and that he had been right about his suspicions. Gillian told him he had left his past behind, and that now, all he was a servant of Lord Cecil, nothing more. The assassin became furious at those words, charging forward with fury, determined to end the old mercenary's life. The two were extremely skilled. They began exchanging blows at an unstoppable pace. Even trying to pressure the old mercenary, the assassin couldn't find any opening. He said the mercenary group vanished after their captain abandoned them, and because of that, he couldn't fulfill his dream and had to take on that kind of dirty work to survive. Gillian continued listening to the man's words, while countering every single attack, showing he was fully intent on ending him. The mercenary's last blow created a large opening. The assassin used it to kick him. That final blow destroyed the shield Gillian was using. Virgo said he was ready to give his entire life to make Ratatosk the most famous mercenary group in the world. But that old mercenary abandoned everything to become a noble's dog. And now Virgo deeply despised him. He hurled his daggers toward Gillian. The old mercenary managed to block all of them using his axe. But the assassin used that moment to approach him stealthily. If not for Gillian's speed, that strike would have landed for sure. The two clashed blades once more. Virgo felt like he had the upper hand in that duel, believing the old mercenary was no longer at the peak of his strength. While Gillian had spent all those years caring for his sick daughter, the assassin had gained experience in the underworld. He believed they were no longer on the same level. After shifting positions, the assassin retrieved his daggers with his boot, once again hurling them toward the old mercenary. This time, they struck him, blocked only by the armor on his shoulder. He also realized the assassin wasn't stopping his advance. When he attempted to hit him with the axe, Virgo said, "See you later." Finding an opening, he believed he would finish the fight with that strike. But things didn't go as he planned. The mercenary's hand managed to catch his blade. Gillian asked if his desire for revenge was really that strong. Virgo finally understood what had just happened. The old mercenary had blocked his attack by shielding his hand with mana. He couldn't believe his own mana wasn't able to break through that defense, and right after, his face was struck by the axe. The first strike that hit him was strong enough to end the battle. His body slammed into a tree, and now the assassin was trying to recover. Gillian began approaching the man, saying he didn't understand. He said that if the assassin truly wanted revenge, he could have attacked him at any time. It was curious, to say the least, that he had waited until that day. The assassin said that he really must not know what happened. He had already gone to the old mercenary's home to carry out his revenge. But when he found there wasn't the leader he once knew, it was just a weak old man, not worth the effort. It wasn't the Gillian he used to admire. The old man finally understood what was going on. Throwing a sword toward the assassin, he told him to stand up. He said that now he too was being led by someone, and from that moment forward, he would treat his old companion with the respect he deserved. As the leader of the Ratatosk mercenaries, Virgo seemed to like the way things were turning out. As soon as he picked up the sword from the ground, he said he had finally found a worthy opponent, and the swords they carried clashed once more. The assassin said that was exactly what he had been looking for. The two began exchanging blow after blow. Sometimes the old mercenary was on the offensive. At other moments, the assassin managed to put pressure on him. The battle was fierce, until the old mercenary managed to stab his sword into the assassin's ribs. Immediately, the man began writhing in pain. Even with such a critical wound, he tried to strike the old mercenary one last time. But that only gave Gillian the chance to bring his axe down on him. He said he would remember him. Virgo Valanos, leader of the 5th unit of the Ratatosk mercenaries. The poor man gave a faint smile before his life was ended by the mercenary's blade. At last, the ambush attack had come to an end. Gillian retrieved the sword he had given to his opponent. He was ready to continue the journey, until our boy told him he had done a good job. Belinda said the equipment they could salvage from those people would be worth a lot of money. Gillian apologized to Cecil, saying it had taken longer than expected, but our boy said it was fine, while also admitting that he was an even more exceptional warrior than he had expected. When he started working as a mercenary in his past life, he heard many stories about him, and Cecil felt great relief to have succeeded in recruiting him. Looking at the old mercenary, he asked if he remembered who that man was. Gillian said yes, he was an old companion. Our protagonist seemed to understand what he was feeling now. He also wanted to know where his old companions were and what they were doing with their lives now. And he was sure of one thing: he would try to recruit them again. But he decided to follow Belinda's advice and collect everything of value from that place. Belinda asked the old mercenary to start working, but he was clear in saying that he didn't work for her. After 2 long days of travel, they finally arrived in Perdium territory. Belinda was quite relieved she couldn't take traveling anymore. Looking outside, our protagonist was able to see his family's lands. Feeling how good it was to have a place to return to in his past life, he thought he could return whenever he wanted, but things hadn't gone that way. Cecil asked the old mercenary what his first impression of the land was. He stuttered for a moment, then said he thought it was good. Noticing the insincerity of his answer, Cecil asked if he didn't think it was all a mess, which made the mercenary a little uneasy. The houses were old and the land wasn't being cultivated, since the men were working in the army. Gillian had heard that this territory was constantly at war with barbarians, but he hadn't imagined the situation was this bad. Cecil assured him he would solve all those problems. That's why he needed everyone's help. This was going to be a long battle to protect everything that mattered to him. After he eliminated Delphine and her allies, he would make sure these lands prospered, no matter what. Finally, their carriage was entering the castle. Before they could step inside, Belinda noticed something. Our boy was also very surprised by what he saw. The man standing before them was his father. In the Count's chamber, they were discussing matters concerning the territory's defense. Resources were extremely scarce. The aid they used to receive was dwindling more and more. Leopold was currently investing in its own troops. They have no other choice. They must maintain the defense at the edge of the forest, but there are too few men to do all of it. Reducing the number of troops could be dangerous. Cecil realized that those men hadn't changed at all. There stood the captain of the knights, Rudolph, the finance officer, Albert, and the family's superintendent, Homer. For young Cecil, only a few weeks had passed. But for the king of mercenaries, it had been decades, and he began by thanking them for their hard work on the battlefield. Speaking directly to his father at Zivolta Perdium, when he was younger, our boy used to despise the discipline and rigidity of his father, but now he could truly see the situation for what it was. That man carried a heavy burden of responsibility on his shoulders. The Count knew his son had been away for a week and asked where he had gone. Cecil said he had paid a small visit to the Leipold territory. His father asked if he had caused trouble again, and the boy said no. Albert said it was hard to believe, but he heard the young master had earned money by winning a duel against Cain. He wanted to know if the boy had gone to that other territory to gamble away what he had earned. Our boy thought of it more as an investment and said he had gone to talk business with his fiancée. The superintendent said he was the heir of the house and should plan every action carefully. The boy replied that he didn't need to worry, but the old man didn't appreciate being interrupted. That's when the Count said that was enough, because he had heard the boy got into trouble during his absence. He also heard Cecil had taken down Jamal and Philip, the guards who tried to kill his sister, and wanted to know if it was true. Our boy didn't even remember the names of those men. Randolph didn't believe he did it alone and assumed the boy had been lucky. Cecil figured the captain of the knights wouldn't want to hear that men under his command had been defeated by someone so useless, and not wanting to drag out the matter, said that was more or less what happened. Randolph let out a relieved sigh, feeling validated in his assumptions, but the Count said he had done well. It didn't matter what means he had used. What mattered was his sister's life. This was the first time our boy received a compliment from his father. He took the opportunity to ask him for a favor, which surprised the Count. The superintendent said that if it was an allowance, he wouldn't get it. Randolph agreed, saying the boy had caused more problems in recent years than he had done good. He had sold military supplies to fund gambling, caused a fire in the castle, and even killed a horse just to eat its meat. Our boy realized he really had been a difficult person, but he had a request to make of his father. He wanted his permission. In the presence of everyone there, he declared he would conquer the forest of monsters. Despite saying it calmly, his eyes showed great determination. Outside the room, he told his companion that his father said no. In fact, none of those people liked his suggestion. Belinda had already expected something like that forest was full of monsters. Our boy asked the old mercenary if Belinda had explained the situation to him, and the mercenary said he was already aware of the plan to take the forest. It was also known as the Forest of Death. No one who entered it had ever made it out alive. Its notoriety was known in other territories as well. Cecil realized the man was very well informed. That forest might bring suffering, but there was something more. He was eager to begin his journey, which worried Belinda since he hadn't received permission yet. The boy said he hadn't gone there to get his father's approval. He was only being polite. This had to be done no matter what. Belinda wanted to understand why he was so persistent, asking what was in that forest. Cecil said he would tell her soon. He couldn't allow any rumors to spread right now. It could cause problems. But if he conquered that forest, he would make a lot of money. Just past its entrance, there was a large mine of rune stones. That was an ore containing magical power, extremely rare and highly coveted by mages. Used in many instruments and tools. Everything related to magic depended on this mineral and its quality. In the boy's past life, it was Duke Delphine who discovered that mine. But now, only he possessed that privileged information. Belinda seemed increasingly uneasy with the young master's plans. But she accepted that he must have his own motivations. The mercenary said he would follow him anywhere. Cecil asked the woman to recruit mercenaries from nearby territories. They would need 200 men. She thought he was going to spend all the money on that. Gillian asked if that was really a good idea. Mercenaries are difficult to deal with, and keeping them under control would be complicated. They'd likely try to stab him in the back. Cecil agreed, which was why he and Gillian would personally recruit a few who might be truly reliable. He said there was a small group in the north that was well known. Gillian knew exactly who he was talking about, referring to them as wild dogs. Even though they're very skilled, they're difficult people to get along with. Cecil already knew the reputation of the Kelveros mercenaries. As they continued the journey, he said he would put a leash on those violent dogs. Their camp was located in the territory of Zimvar. Before our protagonist even arrived, he had already been spotted by the mercenaries. Some of them started mocking the two, saying they had no idea what was coming for them. Seeing the clothes our protagonist was wearing, one man assumed he really was a noble. They'd have a great opportunity to make some money. But he was immediately surprised by Gillian's hands. The sounds of his screams started drawing the attention of the other mercenaries, who finally realized what was going on. Gillian was gripping the man's head tightly, his hand pressing harder and harder. Then he tossed his body toward the rest of the mercenaries. That started to make them all very angry. It didn't take long for them to surround the two, asking if that old man had lost his mind. One man approached them, acknowledged that the boy was a noble, but said he shouldn't act that way in this place, because he might not leave with all his body parts. Before the man in the bandana could start the fight, he heard the sound of hooves. Our protagonist had joined them too. Telling the man to shut his mouth, he asked who the leader of that squad was. Those men didn't seem to like the tone of our boy's voice. They said the young man had no idea where he was. While spinning his club, the man said he was the one who had started all of this. Throwing the weapon toward him, he said the young noble should be held responsible for what he had done. The weapon was about to hit the boy's head, but it was instantly intercepted midair. Gillian wasn't going to let that happen. His display of skill left some of the soldiers stunned, and the man in the bandana was one of them, because the old man had managed to strike his sword right through the gaps in the chain, completely nullifying the attack. Cecil had already expected they wouldn't be very open to conversation, so he asked Gillian one thing: make sure not to kill any of them. After receiving the order, the fun began. The first to find out he was just a side character was the one who attacked our protagonist. His body was dragged by the old mercenary like a pillow. He also used the momentum of the move to swing the club, hitting the man in the stomach with great precision. That was all it took for the other soldiers to charge him, saying they wouldn't spare him just because he was with a noble. Gillian started showing them just how skilled he really was, throwing one soldier's body into the others. The fight had barely started and several soldiers were already down. Gillian showed them he had a truly threatening aura, capable of intimidating anyone. Now the soldiers weren't feeling so brave anymore. That's when our protagonist decided to get off his horse, asking how much longer they'd have to wait there. He didn't want to waste time with the small fry in that place and asked once again where their captain was. The captain finally appeared, saying he had been taking a very pleasant nap. As soon as his voice was heard, the mercenaries stood at attention for him. The man said his name was Kerr, and he was the leader of that mercenary group. Now that he had introduced himself, he asked what that young noble expected from him. Cecil said the answer was obvious. He had come to hire them. But Kerr disagreed. No one would do that after attacking their subordinates. If that boy really was a noble, he should understand at least basic etiquette. Cecil said that was his way of greeting them, thinking it would be the best way to take control of them all. Kerr didn't like those words. He said the boy was about to start a war with all of them, but he decided to hear him out. Gathered inside a tent, the meeting began. Kerr wanted to know what the job was. Cecil said they were going to the forest of monsters, and he was hiring them to help with that mission. Some soldiers began to murmur about it, as they were well aware of the forest's reputation. Kerr found the proposal interesting and asked why the boy would want to enter such a dangerous place. Cecil said that he was the heir of the Perdium family. That alone was reason enough. The mercenaries fell silent, only to burst into laughter shortly afterward, doubting that our protagonist could accomplish something so difficult. Kerr said that place wasn't meant for the weak like him, and he had heard enough of his proposal, stating that he no longer had any business with that noble. But our boy wasn't there to back down. Provoking the mercenary, he asked if he was afraid of the task. He said he had heard that Kerr's group was really strong, but it seemed those rumors were lies. Kerr put his feet up on the table, saying the boy was jumping to ridiculous conclusions. They were mercenaries, and they didn't take jobs that didn't pay well. Cecil said the weak are always full of excuses, and the mercenary began to feel more and more insulted. Kerr said he wanted to provoke him a bit more, but the boy only had dramatic phrases. It wasn't even worth the time to kill him. He said he'd let him leave safely, as long as he left some money to treat the wounded. But our boy didn't accept that offer, and challenged Kerr to a Moriana trial. The soldiers and Gillian were immediately impressed by the proposal. Kerr even asked if the boy really knew what that meant, and our protagonist said he knew very well. It was a traditional way for mercenaries to resolve disputes. The two involved couldn't use mana and had to fight using only a dagger, while their free hand was tied to their opponents. Stepping outside the designated circle meant defeat. It was a violent method, as it restricted movement. It often ended with both mercenaries dead. Cecil said that whoever lost would have to acknowledge the winner and follow every command, and he asked what the mercenary thought of his offer. Gillian began to wonder, intrigued, how could a noble like that boy know such a custom? In the mercenary world, refusing it was the same as admitting weakness. Before responding, Kerr began to smile. He said the noble wanted to earn the mercenaries' approval through their own customs. He couldn't refuse that. Soon, their hands were tied, and they were ready to begin the duel. Gillian was watching carefully to see what would happen. Kerr believed that the noble must have overheard some things, but he would soon regret it. He pulled on his arm to show that he was stronger, saying he had already done that trial 5 times. Our boy adjusted his posture, then pulled Kerr back with the same strength he had been pulled, revealing that he had done the trial hundreds of times. After that short exchange, the fight between them truly began. Both had to be extremely careful. Any misstep could lead to defeat. In their first strike, neither blade found its target. They corrected the path of their daggers. Their necks were nearly slashed within inches. Even though the distance between them was practically zero, no hits landed, until Kerr decided to use his superior strength. Turning our boy around, he tried to strike a few more times, but Cecil, empowered by protagonist instincts, managed to defend every blow, until he pulled off an effective dodge. Facing his opponent once again, However, he realized the next attack wouldn't come from the hand holding the knife. The boy had to block a kick from his opponent. Since they couldn't use mana in the duel, physical strength was truly vital. Kara said he was holding up well, but doubted he had really done this hundreds of times. It was hard to do even once in a lifetime. While attacking, he said our protagonist needed to be a bit more convincing with his words. The mercenaries believed the noble was being pressured by their leader. Gillian watched them with rage in his heart, making those mercenaries stop cheering immediately. But the truth was, he also realized it. The boy was at a disadvantage. The circle was too small. Without mana, they depended entirely on physical power. The difference in size made everything harder. Cecil was barely managing to block the strikes from his opponent. Kor seemed to behave as if he could do whatever he pleased. But the old mercenary already had a contingency plan. If his master's life was at risk, he would make his axe sing. Kor managed to grab Cecil's arm and was about to slam him into the ground. The boy managed to move ahead before it happened, jumping just in time before being thrown. Landing on the ground behind his opponent, before he could take advantage of the opportunity, he felt a sharp pain in his leg. That injury came from when he blocked the first kick, and now the damage is starting to accumulate. Kor asked the boy if his legs were starting to shake, believing that his effort to resist the attacks is pathetic, yet acknowledging that for a noble, he's got some guts. But courage has its limits, and he thinks he has figured out the boy's plan. He keeps defending against the knife, while using his own body to block the less dangerous attacks. The problem is that this is causing the damage to build up in his body. Cecil is already aware that sooner or later his leg won't hold up. Kor is very interested to see how far this boy can go, because that only makes the challenge even more fun. Kor is an experienced mercenary highly skilled with knives. He continues to pressure our protagonist with ease. His strikes pass by him, nearly hitting him at every moment. Even after some openings, Cecil has no opportunity to counterattack. This time, our boy got ahead of himself, leaving his hand extended too far. That brought him dangerously close to the mercenary's knee. Before he could be struck in the face, Cecil blocked the attack using his own leg, feeling that he's close to reaching his limit to absorb it all. Kor believes he's getting closer and closer to the end. This time, he's going to land a clean hit on the boy. Gillian realized he might need to intervene to prevent the worst. But our protagonist still has an ace up his sleeve. He wasn't hit by that dagger, and now he was exactly where he wanted to be. Kor didn't expect the boy to dodge that strike. Cecil took the opportunity to circle around his opponent. Finally, the first hit of that challenge had landed, and the mercenary realized he wasn't the one who struck first. Both the soldiers watching and the old mercenary were surprised by the outcome. Kor tries to strike back immediately, but his blade only found the wind, and in response, he was cut once again. It's hard to believe he was hit twice by a noble. The soldiers started cheering for their leader, trying to boost his morale, while Gillian watched in complete disbelief. The mercenaries' attempts were all being thwarted, and now he started taking hits in every possible way. Cecil had created an excellent opportunity, managing to hit him in the face repeatedly. Switching the position of the dagger in his hands, he drove the blade into the mercenary's forearm. Completely driven by rage, he tried to hit the boy in any way possible, but none of it was working at that moment. He started thinking the boy was cheating, because just seconds ago, he couldn't dodge any of his strikes. Gillian, on the other hand, observing the fight, could understand what was happening. Striking with force tenses the muscles, and over time, that reduces flexibility. Cecil didn't try to overcome his opponent's strength. Instead, he let his body remain flexible. The old mercenary didn't expect Cecil to overcome the physical disadvantage like that, and foreseeing the result, decided to put away his axe. The mercenaries were now desperately shouting, saying it wasn't fun anymore. Cecil praised the mercenaries' tenacity. Some people would break the rules when losing using mana. Kor noticed the boy spoke as if he had really done this hundreds of times and told him that he became the leader of that group through this very challenge. That's why he can't break the rules. Cecil said that's truly admirable. That's when Kor admitted he was at a disadvantage in a fight like this, but said there are other ways to win. He tried using all of his strength to throw the boy out of the circle, and due to the physical advantage, our boy was launched into the air. Kor knows he's not the best fighter there, but what matters most is securing the win. And he believes that after what he just did, that's exactly what will happen. But our boy managed to pull off a move even in midair. Using his tied hands, he returned to the center of the circle while striking Kor's stomach. Because of the bindings, Cecil was able to prevent himself from leaving the circle. Now he was too close to his opponent. Acting quickly, he managed to immobilize one of his arms, causing the leader of the group to fall to the ground. Everyone realized he was practically defeated, because Kira's head had hit the ground outside the circle. Still unable to accept the outcome, the mercenary asked if he had really lost. And our boy said he is the victor. Kor wanted to understand how someone so young could be so skilled. Cecil said he should learn to behave now because he had become his master. Then he brought the mercenary's body back into the circle. He had no idea what was going on. Cecil said that this mercenary hadn't actually stepped outside the circle, which is why he was about to teach him a proper lesson. Right after saying those words, he struck the mercenary in the face with full force, causing him to fall to the ground once again. Kor tried to plead for him to wait, saying the rules of the challenge state that he loses only when he falls outside the circle. But our boy completely ignored his justification. Sitting on top of him, he asked if he planned to pull out the rulebook in the middle of a battlefield. The mercenary asked if he really considered himself a noble. Cecil said that man shouldn't respond to his master like that, and hit him in the face once more. A full-on facial massage session began right there in front of everyone. As the mercenary took the beating, his subordinates weren't sure if they should step in, since the challenge was technically over. Kor was already begging for it to end, so our protagonist picked him up once more, just to remind him that he still hadn't stepped outside the circle. and the mercenary realized what was happening. Desperate, he ordered his men not to just stand there. They were to kill that guy immediately. Some of them gathered the courage to obey, but they halted their advance as soon as they saw the old mercenary, who was ready to let his axe do the talking. He said anyone who got in his lord's way would get a one-way ticket to find out if the afterlife has an age requirement. At that very moment, those armored men soiled themselves, and Kara realized there was nothing more he could do, because in front of him stood that furious noble who still wanted to continue the conversation. Kara expected words, but instead he got fists. He had been getting beaten for a long time now. The nobles he'd met in his life were all bastards. If they weren't arrogant pigs, they were traitors or simply narcissists. Pathetic worms who begged for their lives the moment they were cornered. Taking money from people like that always brought this mercenary great joy. Now he couldn't understand how someone like him, known as the Mad Dog, ended up in a situation like this, getting beaten by a noble brat. The soldiers were starting to panic, saying their leader was going to die at this rate. That's when our boy realized he might have already done enough. Looking at the soldiers, he asked what they were waiting for. They should be bringing water, bandages, and clean towels to treat that man. If they didn't take care of him soon, he could actually die. Now the soldiers understood what they needed to do and began obeying our boy. Gilliam was genuinely impressed by everything that had happened. Those stubborn mercenaries were following the noble's orders, doing exactly as he commanded. In the mercenary world, the fist holds more power than the law. That's why the boy chose the most intuitive method for them to understand what was happening, so they'd know who the true leader was. Back at the meeting tent, Cecil resumed negotiations with the mercenaries. Kor was supposed to sign the contract presented to him. He looked at the words but didn't bother reading. He simply signed it as he was supposed to, telling our boy he had done his part. Cecil didn't like the tone of that response. Kor responded again, calling him my lord. Liking that answer, our boy grabbed his arm, which startled the mercenary, and told him that from that day forward, they would be family, and he hoped they could do their best while working together. A few days passed, and troops were now in the vicinity of the Perdium territory. One of the soldiers was still sleepy. He didn't know why he'd been woken up so early, and his partner said he couldn't do anything without eating first. One of them was bringing the news to the others. The one who hired them is the heir of the Perdium family. Sighing, one soldier felt relieved by that. He wouldn't even need to try hard since their employer wouldn't notice the difference. That's when someone began clapping in the middle of them, saying they needed a representative to negotiate with that brat and pressure him properly. Everyone recognized that mountain of muscle. His name was Gordon. He said he was very impressed by the way the soldiers were talking about how to make the most profit from this job. If they could join forces, they wouldn't be able to achieve the desired result, and they realized that made sense. The bald guy asked what Big Guy's plan was, and the mountain of muscles replied that they needed to know where to draw the line. He said he would be their representative and would pressure the employer, so if his coworkers should pay him for it. Knowing this strategy might work, they agreed to pay that mercenary too. That's when they noticed someone approaching. From a distance, all they could see was a horse. It was getting closer and closer to them. The mercenaries figured their employer was coming alone, and they were sure that was very bold. The mountain of muscles told everyone to get up and glare at the employer threateningly, because it was time to teach that noble a lesson. But he noticed the boy wasn't coming alone. Behind him was a large army, and those men looked far more intimidating than these mercenaries. One of them soon recognized the group. Those were the Kelveros, famous mercenaries from the region. Now they were wondering what might have happened, since the Kelveros don't obey just anyone. When our protagonists finally reached the men, they had already been intimidated, and our boy looked at the one standing in front of all the others. Asking if he was the representative of everyone, the mountain of muscles said yes. Our boy wanted to know his name. Still stammering, the man said his name was Gordon the Strong. Giving him a few pats on the shoulder, he said the guy had a pretty cool name. Introducing himself to all those men, he said his name was Cecil Perdium. He asked Gordon to gather all the mercenaries, because they were going to conquer the monster forest. For the first time in this whole story, our boy was wearing armor for battle, and now he believed they were truly ready to claim that forest. They had set up a temporary camp for this grand expedition, and also gathered plenty of supplies, as well as the manpower needed to carry it out. Some would remain close to him, and he assigned soldiers to be in charge of operations. Cecil asked Belinda to remind him how many men they had in that situation. In total, there were 148 mercenaries working for him under contract. 41 of them were from the Kelveros mercenaries, totaling 192 men, including them. Our boy seemed pleased with that number and asked if she had already spoken with Scoven. She said yes, she thought he wouldn't agree, but the truth is he was also helping to keep their activities in the forest a secret. Cecil realized the situation was completely in his favor, so he started speaking to all his men. He said they were going to face the monster forest and would claim dominion over it. He was sure everyone had heard the rumors about its dangers. All sorts of monsters lived there, even ones beyond imagination, but they couldn't focus only on the danger. Some of the mercenaries didn't know they were headed to that forest and began to feel afraid, knowing they might die. Belinda didn't like that they had interrupted the young master. Cecil assured them that the fearful could leave now, but promised that if they completed the mission, he would triple their pay. That instantly filled those men with courage. Belinda began scolding the boy because she knew they had spent nearly all their funds on this expedition, but he had done it to boost everyone's morale. And if he completed his mission, money would be the least of their problems. Looking firmly at her, he asked if she still believed in him. Even though she was very worried, Belinda said there was no other choice. Kor believed only a fool would make such a promise, asking the old mercenary if his master was really being reckless. Jillian said the boy knew what he was doing. The troop had finally been assembled, and it was time to march into the forest. They needed to clear a real path, cutting down many trees in the way. Only then could the troops advance. Our boy was also working alongside the mercenaries, managing to bring down a large tree. After a few hours of labor, he realized they had managed to open up the area a bit. Pointing in the right direction, he told his men they should work on clearing a path there. Those not cutting down trees should dig up the roots. According to notes he had seen in his past life, that forest was truly vast. One day, they'd have to drive out all the monsters to exploit its resources. For now, he was there for the money, and he was going to secure the fastest route to the ore source. The wealth he would gain from this expedition would allow him to protect his family. Kuro looked to the side, quite impressed. He hadn't expected his employer to be working too. The mercenaries weren't sure if he was doing that to set an example. They believed he was only showing off and would soon get tired. Belinda told those men to stop talking and ordered them to get back to work. She didn't like hearing those kinds of things about the young master. Walking over to him, she asked why he was working after hiring so many people. Cecil said that this way the job would get done faster. He didn't want to stay in that forest longer than necessary. Belinda said it seemed like he knew that region very well. Kurt commented that his employer even had a woman who cared about him, something to be jealous of. Since he wouldn't stop talking, Gillian accidentally bumped into him with a tree trunk, which made Kimmer want to pick a fight with him. Despite the tension between them, Cecil realized things were going smoothly. After Count Delphin conquered the kingdom, he established a new dynasty and decided to explore that forest. Cecil never discovered what motivated that, but it allowed him to learn privileged information like the monsters that lived there. That way he was able to prepare for them. Some mercenaries didn't understand why they had brought so many lanterns. Torches would have been cheaper. Cecil was starting to get nervous because nothing had happened yet. The information he had came from a book. He had never seen anything with his own eyes, so he told his men not to let their guard down, because they were venturing deeper and deeper into the forest. The mercenaries continued cutting down trees. It finally got dark, and one of them asked if it was already nighttime. Another was skeptical about the danger. They hadn't seen anything. Maybe the rumor was exaggerated. Maybe this job was actually worth it, and the bald guy wanted to be paid by Gordon, who had done nothing for them. But it seemed that man saw something. He called over his companions. He said that on the way there, they had cut down several trees. His companions agreed it had definitely been done. The problem was that the path they had cleared was now gone. That left the mercenaries deeply concerned. Cecil told everyone they should prepare to fight, and all the mercenaries drew their swords. Some started to get nervous. They couldn't see anything, so they didn't know why they should prepare to fight. Cecil began talking to Gordon, saying he would die if he stayed there. He told him to step back slowly, one step at a time, and the mercenary began following the instructions. But being extremely clumsy, he hit one of the trees with the trunk he was carrying. Thrown off balance by the impact, he fell to the ground shortly after. His companions began to worry about it, and Gordon looked back, visibly worried. But so far, nothing had happened. His companions were nervous, but didn't know what they should be waiting for. Cecil remained completely focused. That's when the bald guy said their employer was just a scared kid. He told them to look around. They must have gotten confused because everything in that forest looked the same. The forest was just dense and nothing more. Cecil told the bald man to step back too, slowly, or he could end up dead. The bald guy didn't like that attitude. He said our protagonist was just trying to scare everyone to control them. Before he could finish his speech, something grabbed him by the waist, and the bald man felt himself being pulled from behind. He didn't know what was happening, but a monster had just captured him. They did it without making a sound. Cecil hadn't expected those creatures to move so much. Unless you knew where they were, those monsters could end your life in the blink of an eye. Cecil knew those were Darasents. Several creatures began revealing themselves in that forest. Immediately, the mercenaries there were struck with terror. Afraid of being eaten alive, they began running in a panic. The monsters took advantage of the chaos to start the free buffet. Some soldiers were captured and were about to be devoured. Those monsters seemed to have an endless hunger, and they were beginning to consume our protagonist's army. Gordon clung to a tree with all his strength. He didn't want to be eaten. While crying out for help, some of his companions tried to cut the vine. One of their strikes was quite powerful, but it had no effect. On the contrary, his axe was destroyed in the process. He realized he couldn't save his companion that way. Gordon was finally pulled by the monster. But before he could be devoured, our boy jumped into action, managing to cut the vine that held his subordinate. Cecil was showing them all that he possessed great skill, striking the creature's eye as well. Right after that, it was clear the monster began writhing in agony. The mercenaries saw that their employer had managed to wound one of the creatures. Cecil started shouting in the middle of them, telling his men to pull themselves together. If they scattered in that forest, they'd become easy targets. They needed to protect themselves with their shields and stay together. Until they received the next order, they should focus on defense, and the mercenaries seemed to understand that, forming a tight shield formation as none of them wanted to die in that place. Cecil went to Kara to get the oil lanterns. He said they should light them and throw them at the monsters. Now the mercenary understood why they had brought so many lanterns. One of the soldiers said the monsters were getting closer. Cecil ordered everyone to throw the lanterns. This was their chance. And so they did as commanded. The fire was heading toward the creatures. Just as they were about to be hit, the monsters used their vines to destroy the lanterns. Kor was impressed, realizing they had blocked everything. They wouldn't be able to set them on fire that way. Now the monsters resumed their attack. That's when a powerful axe made its entrance. Gillian was defending the men using his skills. Belinda was doing the same. Showing her mastery with daggers, she managed to hit another creature in the eye. Cecil told them to keep protecting the others while preparing to throw more lanterns. Our boy charged at the creature with his sword. Belinda was very worried about him, wishing the young master would be cautious. The boy was able to defend himself with great skill, but the monster was just waiting for the slightest opening to strike him. After multiple attacks, our boy dodged every one of them, getting closer and closer to that terrifying creature. The soldiers noticed that those monsters had feet too. They definitely weren't just trees. Cecil was nearly crushed by one of the monsters, but managed to cut what seemed to be the creature's leg. And right after that, he drove his sword into its eye. While the monster screamed in sharp, intense pain, the soldiers noticed the boy was being surrounded. Belinda said this was the moment. Everyone needed to start throwing the lanterns, because this time the strategy was going to work. Since the monsters were distracted by our boy, they weren't able to block the lanterns, and then they began to catch fire. Cora was highly entertained by the success of the plan. Cecil said they must not stop. They had to keep pressuring the monsters until every last one of them had been consumed by the flames. It didn't take long for the fire to spread everywhere. Some mercenaries were amazed. They hadn't imagined it would be possible to fight those things. That was enough to fill them with courage. Maybe the task was easier than they had expected. Gordon believed those trees didn't stand a chance against fire. Cecil said his men couldn't let their guard down yet. The fight was only beginning. Now they were going to witness the true form of those monsters. A great cloud of smoke began to rise. The men didn't know what had caused it and were wondering if the fire had gone out. Belinda and Gillian rushed to our protagonist immediately, intending to protect him. The woman wanted to know what happened to those things. Cecil said their outer layer was weak to fire, but their flesh wasn't. That vapor came from the fire reacting with their flesh. As the smoke cleared, a thick shell could be seen. Those monsters were revealing their true form, and now they were charging furiously at our protagonist's army. Some soldiers were terrified by the sight. They thought they had already won. That's when they saw the boy's sword raised. He asked everyone to listen to his words. They should raise their weapons now, because that battle had turned into close combat, and he was the first to charge into the enemy ranks. The soldiers simply watched as that noble ran alone into battle. Some couldn't accept the idea of facing those monsters. They were sure they'd be crushed. Cora's mercenaries didn't hesitate to enter the fight. They had been waiting for an opportunity like this. Even Belinda ran after the young master to make sure he would stay safe. Gillian asked the rest of them what they were waiting for to get to work too. They had received an order from their employer. They needed to trust and follow his lead. The problem was that many of them had already soiled their underwear. But since there was no other choice, they decided to charge into battle, confident in the young master's strategy. Now that the monsters weren't protected by that shell, they could be defeated without using mana. Cecil said his men must not be afraid. They should defeat those creatures as quickly as possible. Now his entire army is fighting together. Hesitation in that place is the same as death. Cecil's duty is to encourage his men so they don't have time to hesitate. To set an example for all of them, he kept cutting down those creatures as if they were made of butter. He needs to strengthen his men's willpower so they begin to believe that nothing is impossible. After several intense minutes, it seems they finally managed to defeat all the creatures. Some of his soldiers are struggling to believe they actually did it. Cecil ordered everyone to get back in formation immediately, and they quickly fell in behind him. That was just a small sample of what the monster forest truly is. They hadn't even entered it properly yet and already had to face multiple direst ends. The mercenaries realized things are only going to get harder. Cecil said they shouldn't worry, because he will always make sure to guide them across the battlefield. That's why they should trust his orders and follow his leadership. Little by little, those men were starting to believe that this might actually work. His army kept advancing through the forest, defeating the monsters that appeared and cutting down the trees in their path. Belinda remained excessively cautious with him, while increasingly dangerous creatures kept appearing deeper in that cursed forest. The mercenaries began to feel like there was no end to that hell, but among them were some with great determination. Gillian and Kara were true forces of nature. After cutting the leg of a huge creature, it began to fall toward the men. Gillian stopped that from happening, holding the beast back with his shield. Right after that, it was finished off by our protagonist's strike. Once that battle ended, he asked if any of them were injured, but everyone was fine. The mercenaries already knew that if they wanted to survive and overcome that challenge, they needed to stay close to the young master. Gillian noticed the mercenaries were becoming more cohesive, and Kara said there's nothing better than experience. Cecil approached his men and told them they still had a long road ahead. But among them was a mercenary who couldn't overcome his own fear. He was convinced that everyone there had gone insane. The forest must have clouded their judgment. With the moon high in the sky, they reached a large water source. The mercenaries immediately rushed to drink from it, not expecting to find anything like that. Belinda said they were fools and should act with more caution. Cecil was thinking that everything had gone ideally so far. They needed to cross that lake to reach the ore source. He said they would set up camp in that spot and rest for the night. Gradually, the mercenaries gathered around campfires, wondering what the forest still had in store for them, until one of those groups received an unexpected invitation. One of the men was planning to flee that place. He said there was no longer any reason to keep risking their lives in the forest. Staying alive was more important than money. Gordon told him they'd come too far to turn back, and he'd heard from the young master that they were close to the destination, but the coward didn't believe a word of it. He believed that the young man was only trying to gain recognition from other nobles by taking reckless actions. But those mercenaries had already been paid, and they would follow the orders given to them, not to mention that the young master had saved their lives more than once. The coward acknowledged the skills of our protagonist, but believed they'd just been lucky so far. One wrong move and they'd all be dead. He claimed that the young master would treat them like trash. As soon as things got difficult, they'd be used as meat shields. All nobles were the same. Slowly, some of the mercenaries began listening to him. That was what the coward wanted, since he couldn't leave the forest completely alone, and he planned to use his companions as bait if necessary. One of them said they all should already be dead. They were only alive because of the young master, and he pointed to him at that exact moment. Our boy was applying ointment to heal the wounds of those mercenaries, giving each of them instructions on what to do for proper recovery. Belinda knew that medicine was very expensive and wished he would save it for a more special occasion, but he had brought it for this. to use on those in need, and there was a line of mercenaries waiting for it. One mercenary said that the medicine being used on them was worth far more than the payment they'd receive individually. It made no sense for them to be used as human shields after all that care. And looking at that fact, they realized this employer was completely different from any they had met before. They knew they wouldn't be abandoned. The coward walked away from the campfire, furious. If it hadn't been for that man with the eye patch, he might have convinced someone. Cecil began asking his men to stop chatting and get some rest, but he wanted to talk a bit with Gillian and Kerr. Kerr wanted to know if the young master wasn't going to do anything in his place, he would have cut out that worm's tongue. Cecil said he wouldn't be able to do anything because of the monsters, but there was something far more important they needed to confirm now. Belinda didn't understand why they were asked to count the lanterns. They currently had 24. As expected, Cecil noticed they had fewer and fewer. On the first day of the expedition, monsters attacked their company day and night, but the last 2 nights had been surprisingly quiet. His men wanted to know what that meant. Gillian said they had entered the territory of a creature that hunts at night, and it was certainly powerful. Our boy confirmed that was the case. That's why he was starting to get a little worried, because they had arrived at the most dangerous part of their expedition. It didn't take long for all the mercenaries to begin resting. While Gordon was sleeping peacefully, he began to feel the glow of something approaching his face. He realized it was one of the lanterns they had brought, and he was immediately terrified, because that object should not be floating, which was why he was so afraid. He also noticed something was far too close to his neck. He began making a huge scene, which quickly got the attention of all his companions. Squinting his weapon wildly, he said there was a monster there, doing everything he could to stop it from getting close to him. Only Gordon was able to see those creatures. As he moved around in panic, his companions were trying to understand what was going on. Gordon tried to explain the situation, saying he could swear there had been a monster right beside his neck just moments ago. But to his companions, it only seemed like a nightmare, because there was nothing in the camp, and Gordon realized they were telling the truth. Noticing that he could no longer see the creatures, they tried to calm him down, saying it was just a nightmare, and given all the stress they've been under lately, it was to be expected. But another mercenary approached them and said it wasn't a dream. He had woken up because he felt a strange presence. Right after that, a lantern vanished before his eyes. Soon others began saying the same thing, that they were feeling a weird chill. The man with the bandana said one thing was certain in this situation. Something was watching the camp. That's when our protagonist appeared, saying that man was absolutely right. He came accompanied by his commanders, and brought an order for all his men. They were to gather immediately. All the mercenaries were now awake and assembled at the camp. Elsewhere, inside a cabin, Cecil was meeting with a few of them. Gordon was terrified to learn they were surrounded by monsters, and as if that weren't enough, they couldn't even see the creatures. Cecil explained that this was the main trait of this type of abomination. They had likely been followed ever since they approached the lake. This monster is a type of creature capable of fully mastering the night, the hunter of darkness. They can merge with the shadows, becoming completely invisible, and physical attacks don't work on them either. They travel in groups of hundreds and drag their victims into the dark. After hearing how many creatures there were, the mercenaries were truly horrified. Now Belinda understood why the lanterns in the camp were disappearing, while Kor felt they were being toyed with. Completely furious, he wanted to attack the creatures first, before they could continue that situation. But the young master said they had to wait. That was the best way to strike. Belinda said they were already down to less than half the lanterns they had brought. They couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Cecil said a reckless attack would only provoke the creatures. They would retreat for a while and come back even more vicious, and they'd miss the chance to wipe them all out at once. Gillian asked if there was really a way to defeat hundreds of monsters in one opportunity. Our boy said yes, and he asked if Belinda had prepared the magic scrolls he had requested. She had already done so and handed one to each mercenary. Now it was time for the boy to explain how they would fight that threat. After making a few markings on the ground, he said they were surrounded on 3 sides. The creatures are stealing the lanterns and tightening the encirclement more and more. The numerical advantage belongs to them, which is why they can't be attacked all at once, as they could be ambushed from behind. Gillian realized that the geography of the place has been favoring them. If it weren't for the lake, they would be in an even worse situation. Cecil said that even though they are surrounded, the advantage belongs to them, as they are one step ahead of the creatures. His companions didn't seem to understand those words, so he said he would divide their forces into 3 units. One made up of the shield bearers, who would be responsible for blocking the attacks. Another composed of archers, who would be responsible for maintaining distance. And finally, an assault group in which he would also be included. The shields and arrows would force the enemies to stay in a single position. As soon as that happened, the assault group would move from left to right, eradicating all the creatures. Once they regrouped, they would be able to encircle the remaining creatures. That would be the moment of victory. After hearing that strategy, they felt a bit more confident, but they would be relying on the central units. Belinda asked everyone to pay attention for a moment. She heard that the creatures hide in the darkness and cannot be touched, so she wanted to know how they planned to attack the monsters. And indeed, everyone was waiting for an answer from our boy. Kor said they could just use humans to solve that, while Cecil said they would use the magical scrolls. The strategy was already being put into action. The shield unit was in position, and they would not break formation. All the lanterns in that camp had been stolen by the creatures. Delphine's notes mentioned something about those creatures. These monsters have a strong aversion to any type of luminous energy, and as soon as they are illuminated, they revert to their physical form. Everyone began tearing the scrolls that had been provided, a coordinated action. Magical energy began gathering above the camp, and the monsters noticed that something was happening, because an intense luminous energy was coming down upon them all, forcing their bodies to reappear physically once more. The mercenaries could now see what they were truly fighting. Gordon had not imagined that these shadows had been surrounding his camp, and even after being revealed, the monsters kept advancing. The archers were prepared to maintain distance from the creatures. They were firing to allow the shield division to hold their position, while the protagonist's assault group was waiting for his command. Their true forms had been revealed, and our boy was ready to coordinate his men. He gave the order for them all to begin the attack. Gathered with courage and determination, it didn't take long before those creatures started being exterminated. Our protagonist is highly skilled with the sword and is enthusiastically eradicating those beings. Even though the creatures can hide in the shadows, their physical form is truly weak. His assault group can destroy them quickly, and he gave the order for them to kill as many as possible in the shortest time. Gillian is capable of drawing the enemy's attention, as he can block a large volume of attacks. Kor takes advantage of this opportunity to cause distraction on all sides while destroying several creatures. At one point, he was nearly surrounded by them, but he wasn't alone in that position. Belinda is supporting her companions while providing cover. After that strike, she immediately called for the young master, who had also joined the front line to destroy the monsters. With his sword coated in mana, those creatures posed no real threat. They had become the most formidable force of House Perdium. The light of their magic continued to illuminate the battlefield clearing. The soldiers using bows were taking this opportunity to hit as many creatures as possible. They were within our protagonist's strategy. There was little to nothing they could do against that army. The archers had run out of arrows and were beginning to worry, as the assault group had not yet reached their position. While holding the line as best they could, the monsters finally reached the shield barrier, but there would be no fun for them there, because the assault group arrived at that very moment, continuing the eradication of the monsters. Cecil said that his mercenaries had done a good job so far. Those responsible for holding the shields felt a great sense of relief, realizing that to that noble, they weren't just tools. The new order was to surround the remaining ones. The mercenaries should seize this opportunity to strike even more. Soon the creatures began fleeing from those humans. Seeing them retreat, our protagonist's army held their position. Cecil realized the creatures were doing this to avoid being surrounded by their enemies. They are quick to understand their situation. Cecil asked Belinda to locate the lead creature. He said it has a horn on its head, and is the one responsible for signaling the others to flee. The assault group is still chasing the monsters. Cecil knows they are relentless enemies. If they escape now, they'll strike again later. Our protagonist knows his men can't withstand another wave. He needs to end this now, and for that, they must defeat the creature's leader, no matter what. Belinda is becoming more and more impressed with the boy. She realizes he truly has changed a lot in recent months. After using her ability, she was ready to reach the creature among all the others. She threw her hook toward a tree branch. Using it, she launched herself into the air. From there, she had a clear view of what was happening. It would be easier to spot the horned creature, and it didn't take long before she saw the beast. As soon as her eyes found the creature, she prepared to capture it. She looped her hook around its neck. As soon as she caught the creature, she relayed the information to the young master, who began to break into the monster's formation. Now he just needed to end that beast's life. With a powerful charge, Cecil crossed several meters in the blink of an eye, completely destroying the monster's ribcage. Finally, their nightmare had come to an end. Finishing his sword motion, our boy turned the creature's body into a giant puzzle. Now that the leader had been defeated, the other creatures began to grow confused. So our boy ordered his army to keep fighting. With their leader gone, it would now be much easier. The mercenaries were furious. They wanted revenge against the creatures that had hidden in the shadows. Kor tried to rally his men, telling them not to fall behind that old mercenary. After a long battle, the sun finally rose through the forest. The last creature was finally executed. Our protagonist's army emerged victorious from that night, which had felt like an eternity. Praising his men's work, Cecil told everyone they had succeeded. That lifted everyone's morale. They were growing more confident in what they could achieve. The joy they felt at having accomplished something once thought impossible was truly remarkable. Belinda wanted to know if the young master had been injured, while Gillian praised his combat skills. A compliment the protagonist returned to all of them. Now it was time to count their numbers. He and the Calvero's mercenaries would spread the creatures' bodies around the camp. Kor asked if that actually accomplished anything. Cecil said the stench of those bodies repels weaker monsters, and there are a few creatures in that forest stronger than the ones they just fought. This will make their camp much safer, said Gillian. And that was enough to spark an argument with Kor, who still held some resentment toward that mercenary. Our protagonist knows it has been 10 days since he entered that forest. After the long battle against the Failors, they had managed to defeat most of the dangerous monsters along this route. They only needed to reach the mine. Cecil knows there's still work to be done. Things weren't over yet in that place. Belinda said there were no losses among the Calvero's mercenaries, but among the hired ones, only 126 remained. Kor had already expected his men to endure. After all, he is their leader. Cecil asked if the 3 missing mercenaries had been killed in combat, but Belinda said no bodies were found. Some of the men were wondering about the coward, and one of them was certain that after the things he heard the man say, he must have tried to run away. A truly predictable behavior from him. Those who were with him realized the battle had ended. They couldn't hear anything anymore and believed they would have died had they not fled. The coward said they needed to hurry. They would only be safe once they were out of the forest. But his companions stopped running immediately. The coward didn't understand what was happening and asked why they had stopped. One of them told him to look behind him. He was faced with a massive pair of eyes belonging to a truly terrifying creature. At that very moment, the coward realized his life would come to a painful and brutal end. That enormous creature, surrounded by human bones, had made its lair among those precious minerals. And that was where she laid the last body she had managed to retrieve. Her eyes are threatening and deep, the last thing many people ever saw in their lives. Now that the sun had risen, the mercenaries returned to chopping trees in the forest. They needed to keep clearing the path. Kor noticed they didn't even need to give orders to the soldiers. Everyone was working as they should. He never imagined mercenaries could be so efficient. And indeed, that's what was happening. Each of those men knew exactly what they were supposed to do, except for one, said Jillian, who wouldn't stop talking during the work. Koa asked if the young master would release all those men after the expedition, and he said he planned to hire them all as his personal soldiers. Mercenaries aren't very organized. They're not fit to defeat a well-trained platoon. But these men had already surpassed the limits of an ordinary mercenary, for they had been in that forest long enough to evolve beyond that. Koa's men had already placed the creatures' bodies around the camp, and he praised Gazel's work. Koa realized that the young master's understanding of the forest made a lot of sense. They hadn't encountered any more dangerous monsters. But our boy knows that much more is still to come within that forest. Belinda began approaching him quickly. It looked like she was bringing news. Our boy asked if she had found anything interesting during her patrol. And with great enthusiasm, the woman said that was exactly what she had come to talk about. As soon as he heard her words, he immediately became agitated and ordered the men to clear the way as quickly as possible, because their final destination was now almost within reach. As soon as the shine of that ore hit the eyes of the men, they were instantly captivated. Indeed, the young master's objective hadn't been a lie. They had found a great treasure. Cecil declared that this was the reason they had come to that forest. They had discovered a rich and abundant vein of rune stones. Koa couldn't believe that something so valuable existed inside that forest. Gillian told him he should have more faith in the young master. Even Belinda became excited, and after hugging him, asked how the boy had known all of that. Those stones are so valuable that some of the men never thought they would see them in their lifetime. But amid those stones, a figure rose up, saying those men weren't going anywhere. That immediately put our protagonist on high alert. That body belonged to the cowardly mercenary, who declared that their end had come. Right after finishing those words, his body collapsed lifeless to the ground. His former companions grew concerned and moved toward him to see what was happening. But our protagonist didn't allow it, placing his sword between them, telling them to step away from that place immediately. Our boy had prepared his sword for offense, and with a clean, precise strike, he swept away the mist that concealed the details of the ground, revealing to all his men that there lay a large pile of bones and decomposing bodies. The mercenaries began to grow frightened. They couldn't understand what had happened there. It wasn't just monsters. There were human bodies as well. Everyone wanted to know what the young master would say about it, and they now realized they wouldn't reach that ore so easily. Judging by the size of that nest, it had to belong to a high-level monster, and based on the condition of the more recent bodies, it wasn't abandoned. Cecil had access to notes about that forest, but none of them mentioned a threat of this level right at the source of the ore. Turning to his men, he said they needed to start preparing. That's when a serpent of absurd proportions revealed itself to all of them. The opening of its mouth was truly impressive, enough to terrify anyone. Presuming it was about to attack, Cecil ordered his men to scatter immediately. He was the first to leap into combat, sword in hand, prepared to give his life. Revealing himself to be even more skilled than that monster, he dodged its strike while landing a blow to the top of its head. After managing to climb onto the creature's body, he prepared a precise thrust aimed at piercing the monster's skull, but its hide was extremely tough. Gillian was surprised that it hadn't worked, since the attack had been infused with mana. Koa realized those scales were indeed very hard. Now our boy needed to get away from that creature as quickly as possible. But while he was still in the air, the serpent hurled venom at him. He instantly realized that could be dangerous, and the serpent's venom ended up hitting his cloak. As he was falling to the ground, he noticed the creature's tail was coming straight for him. Cecil needed to act quickly to avoid having his life ended prematurely. He blocked the monster's attack with his sword, but the creature's strength was far greater than what he could produce, and the boy was thrown hard against the ground. Belinda nearly panicked, wondering if the young master was still safe. After hitting the boy, the serpent began slithering across the area. The mercenaries had to be cautious. If they were caught by that massive body, they could be crushed without even realizing it. Gillian and the others managed to act in time to save some soldiers who might have been trampled. While our boy rose from that pile of bones, the screams of despair became louder and louder. Now that he was facing the creature, everything started to make sense. The serpent was the master of that mine. The blood python, a truly formidable creature. One of the few beings in that forest labeled as too powerful to defeat. It was supposed to reside in the deepest part of the woods. The odds of victory for his team were low. Fleeing was still an option. But as he squeezed one of the rune stones, Cecil realized he couldn't keep wasting time. If he gave up now, everything he had achieved so far would become completely meaningless. That serpent had to be removed from his path. He wasn't going to lose everything he had earned through his own effort. To face that monster, he would need to use all his power, and began unleashing the energy from his third core. Cecil was ready to remove that obstacle from his path. The creature immediately tried to strike him, but he managed to dodge using his sword. And unlike their first encounter, now that his blade was much more powerful, he managed to cut through those scales. He even found an opportunity to strike one of its eyes. The monster hadn't come unprepared and tried to surprise the boy from behind with its tail. But our protagonist managed to defend himself, once again realizing his physical strength was still not enough for such a devastating blow. Even having lost sight in one of its eyes, the serpent remained fierce and furious. Showing our protagonist that it was also skilled, it used its tail to engage him like a sword. Cecil realized that some battles simply cannot be avoided, and even if the chances of victory are slim, he carries the responsibility of everyone around him. He can't allow the lives of those who helped him to be put in danger because of his decisions. Now is the time for him to fulfill his true responsibility, just as his father does for that territory. Cecil was using a tremendous amount of power, but the creature remained threatening. Even after being seriously wounded, it didn't seem the least bit weaker. The boy realized that with every passing second, his third core remained active. Things were getting more dangerous. He would run out of mana before defeating that monster. Belinda ran to him again, clearly worried. While she checked him for injuries, Gillian and Kaor stepped in to shield him. The woman told the young master he needed to move to a safer place. they would hold the creature off. All the mercenaries were committed to that task, but the young master wanted them to be the ones who started escaping. That left his subordinates confused. Gillian wasn't willing to obey that order. Cecil said that although he was powerful against such a massive enemy, he couldn't guarantee everyone's safety, and he didn't want to lose all of his subordinates in that moment. Belinda asked what he planned to do about himself, and our protagonist said he would try to hold the creature back. She knew everything he had accomplished so far had been one miracle after another. She still didn't understand why he kept pushing himself so far. While everyone was distracted talking, the massive creature hurled venom at them once again. Cecil ordered everyone to get out of there immediately. It was becoming too dangerous. But the mercenaries didn't follow that order. They quickly formed a shield wall to protect the young master, preventing him from being hit by the venom. The boy hadn't expected something like that to happen, and those men told him they wanted to stand by his side. They had never had an employer like that boy, who in just a few days had saved each of them multiple times. Cor was also very interested in obtaining that treasure, while Belinda would never leave him behind. Gillian said he would create an opening to distract the beast. Everyone still had great trust in him, and now they hoped the young master would learn to do the same, to trust in others. Cecil realized that being in the position of receiving help is much harder than being the one offering it. That enemy is much larger than any they have faced so far. Its scales resist man attacks, and the creature can spit venom. Every one of its attacks is lethal. Belinda began to worry about the young master. He said the creature is missing one eye and has a large wound on its side. These are now its weak spots. Raising his sword high, he began to rally his men, saying they would all fight together now. Those mercenaries received the greatest motivation. They were ready for anything. As the invincible creature advanced toward them, the mercenaries decided they would not retreat. A fierce battle took place on that battlefield. Cor managed to reach one of the creature's wounds. After plunging his blade into it, the serpent began to writhe in agony. It was time for Gillian to act, striking the monster brutally with his axes. That created a great opportunity. Our protagonist was heading toward the creature's only eye. He struck another of its weak spots with his powerful sword. Even though he has privileged information about the future, that doesn't mean everything will happen as he expects. Still, the boy can plan to overcome the hardships, and if he does nothing about that serpent, many people could die. That is something he will not allow to happen, because only he knows what the future of that territory will be if his plans fail. He launched himself toward the creature's mouth. Our protagonist was swallowed by its massive jaws. For a brief moment, everyone was deeply worried, but shortly after being swallowed, his blade appeared through those scales. The serpent was being completely shredded from the inside out. Our protagonist made a huge wound in its head, emerging from the creature's mouth covered in venom. His men were truly impressed by his audacity and ferocity. Cecil knows he is the future of his family. While they were defeating monsters, a heated argument broke out at the castle. A man slammed the table in fury, saying it was a grave offense. None of them could believe the young master had entered the monster forest. Albert believes the boy is too stubborn and must have deluded himself into thinking he could do what no one else had. It's been 2 weeks since he entered that forest, said the superintendent, so they must start accepting what has happened. If Scoven hadn't given false reports about the situation, they might have been able to try and rescue him. The superintendent doesn't understand why that knight cooperated so much. If the boy did survive, they want to take action. He should be punished for his actions. But unlike those men, his father seemed to notice something else. Randolph suddenly entered the room, bringing news. He said the Lord needed to come outside to see what was happening. Against all odds, Cecil had returned to the castle. The boy was very well dressed and walking toward his family's castle. Now our boy is in his father's office, surrounded by all his advisors. The look in their eyes is very intimidating. They want to know what the boy did in that forest. Cecil told them all that he had returned. His father said he had not granted him permission to try and claim dominion over that forest. The boy apologized for his disobedience, but said those actions were strictly necessary. The superintendent believes he is exaggerating, while Randolph asks if he truly had to disobey his father's order. For entering that forest is a serious offense. Besides the risk of his own life, he could have attracted dangerous creatures into the territory. Cecil said that, as they can see, he came out alive and no monster attacked the territory during that time. The superintendent was outraged by that response, and the captain of the knights was also angry. Alder asked the boy if he thought this was some kind of joke. Even though nothing happened, it might have just been luck, so they would consider this merely a lapse in judgment on his part. But presenting a letter on the table, he said the boy had no excuses for his actions. The boy realized it was a letter from Count Leopold. They had already been suspicious of that visit he made, but they did not expect that he would threaten his fiancée to get 20,000 gold coins. The Count was furious and severed all support he used to give them, and also broke off the engagement. Cecil is trying to understand how the Count had written that letter. Since he doesn't get along with his own daughter, it seems like a forged document. She may have manipulated her own father out of greed, which also confirms she had become his enemy. Those assassins wouldn't be the end of these problems, and now he can no longer exploit the weakness of his former fiancée, as the Count won't believe his words. Had he delayed too long, those events could have prevented all of his actions. Cecil once again realized that time is not on his side. Albert wants to know if the boy has anything to say in the face of all this, because they need to return those 20,000 gold coins. Randolph said that amount could support the army for a while, and our boy said he had already completely spent those resources. They were invested in the conquest of that forest. All the men present listened to those words in silence. They couldn't say anything, because a boy had burned through all that money in a forest with no apparent wealth. Cecil apologized for what happened, but he had nothing to say about Leopold's situation. That's when the captain grabbed him by the collar, saying he's a bastard, a successor who ruined his own territory. The superintendent declared that he is no longer the young master, but merely a common criminal. But our boy said he would fund all of them, stating that he would provide the money they needed, including the 20,000 gold coins. His father asked if he truly knew what he was saying. He asked Belinda to enter the room, and the girl brought in a small chest. Cecil said there was a good reason to enter that forest, which is why he needed to take control of it as quickly as possible. As soon as that small chest was opened, the eyes of the men in the room could hardly believe the glow they saw. They were rune stones of the highest quality. They didn't know how our protagonist had gained access to such material. The superintendent began questioning how he obtained something so valuable, while the captain wanted to know if this was what he had spent the money on. Cecil revealed that he had mined them in the monster forest. Albert recognized that the ore was indeed valuable, but said that amount still wasn't enough to restore the territory. Our boy is aware of that, which is why there's a large amount of that ore outside. There were wagons full of those stones, and the mercenaries were working to unload them. The superintendent didn't believe they managed to gather that entire amount in just 2 weeks, and the captain could hardly believe his own eyes. The count asked Belinda if they had really acquired all that in this expedition, and she confirmed it, saying the young master led them every step of the way. They even brought back the bodies of the most notorious creatures from that forest, stating that the ore they had brought was only a small portion of what they had discovered. Cecil wanted to conquer the forest to contribute to the territory. Those resources belonged to them. Albert did some quick calculations and told his lord that this would cover all their costs for a significant period of time, which left the superintendent and the captain speechless. They immediately approached the young master, saying that what he had done was truly incredible, and that this expedition must have left him exhausted. The boy said he had a few conditions to share with all of them. They must immediately release Ricardo and Scoven from prison, as they were only following his orders. The forest must remain off limits to any citizen. They cannot allow rumors to spread through that region. The superintendent realized these requests were very reasonable and not at all abusive. Finally, the boy wants to manage the troops of that territory, including the mercenaries he had hired. He doesn't want to have to ask for permission for every military action he takes. Randolph asked if the boy really wanted to have his own personal army, saying that's impossible because they don't know what he might do. Albert tried to correct his colleague and said he'd try to be clear. The boy apologized for disobeying his father, but this request was essentially a demand for full autonomy. But our boy said Albert misunderstood. These are his conditions as the future sponsor of this territory in place of Count Leopold. If his demands are not met, he will not be able to contribute to the territory's finances as he wishes. Albert asked the Lord to take a stance as the boy was practically seizing control of the land. That's when the mercenaries approached him. They had finished the work they were ordered to do, and the boy praised all of them for their hard work. Gillian said the stones had already been unloaded, and they would be moved according to the young master's instructions. His other commander said they had also taken care of the creature hides as ordered, and he was awaiting instructions on what to do with the serpent's body. Cecil said they would begin processing it soon. They need to separate the meat, the venom, and the hide before it spoils. The Lord began speaking with Randolph, who was impressed by those mercenaries, and even more impressed by the young master's ability to lead those men. The truth is, the Lord was also very surprised by what he was seeing, realizing that the boy already had a private army. He said mercenaries are difficult to control, yet those follow the boy without complaint. He must have worked hard for that. Cecil said that without their help, he wouldn't have accomplished anything, and his father understood what had happened. Calling his men to return to the castle, he said he would forgive his son's disobedience this time, but next time he would have to bear the consequences of his own actions. And the boy thanked his father for the gesture. The Lord said that one day he would be the lord of those lands, and that there was a northern wolf inside that boy as well. The northern wolf is the title held by the patriarch of this house, the one responsible for protecting those lands. His father had always been a lone wolf, with an underfunded army and a territory plagued by poverty. Even facing such adversity, he spent his entire life fighting a never-ending battle along those borders. He ended up suffering a tragic death without any kind of recognition for his efforts. The mercenaries were relieved they could finally rest. Belinda asked if they were going to the castle, but our protagonist said he would depart on a journey immediately. Gillian said he still needed to recover from everything he went through in the forest. It was a miracle he came out alive after being swallowed by the serpent. Belinda asked if he had any idea how much effort it took for her to neutralize all the effects of that venom. But the boy reassured her with a hand on her shoulder, saying he would leave everything in her hands. With that, he stepped away from his companions. Rumors about what they did in that place would soon spread across the continent, eventually reaching his enemies. Cecil needs to strengthen his territory as quickly as possible, so that no one dares to attack those lands. As he tried to walk, the boy collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. Elsewhere, the evil nobles were gathered, conspiring against our protagonist's family. A carrier pigeon had arrived there, bringing messages. The mysterious man opened the letter and began to read its contents. The letter stated that part of the monster forest had already been conquered. The Diggold must begin a war against Perdium, and Educard will intervene in it. That family must be exterminated at all costs. They realized the time had finally come, and the Duke must have already chosen a new lord for that territory. The man asked how many of their people were still infiltrated in Perdium's lands. One of the nobles said he had 2 vassals and 1 knight there. The mysterious man ordered the vassals to be sent to Digold's territory. The death of one of their sons should be enough to start the conflict, and Victor would be the one responsible for carrying out that mission. The nobles hadn't expected to hear that name, for he is the most powerful weapon of House Desmond, but if Frank had done his job, they wouldn't even be having this conversation. Another noble said that Victor is very reliable, but that it's too soon to reveal their greatest weapon. They had been acting cautiously until now, and he wanted to know why the Duke was interfering in this matter when he usually moves from the shadows. And the mysterious man stated that it was because of the monster forest. All those decisions were in accordance with Duke Delphine's will, and the nobles should not question that. They should prepare for the war that is about to begin. The mysterious man's name is Harold Desmond, and he asked if anyone else was aware of the situation. In the home of our protagonist's former fiancé, someone was seething with anger. Amelia was growing more and more furious over everything that had happened. Her knight was trying to comfort her in the way he could. She couldn't believe that bastard had obtained a runestone mine, all of it funded with the money he took from her. Her assassins had failed to capture him, and even after her father had cut off all aid to those lands, she still felt she had been made a fool. The knight said that didn't sound like her at all. After a deep sigh, she admitted she had let her emotions take control for a moment, realizing she couldn't go back in time to fix her mistakes. The knight was only waiting to receive her orders. He was prepared to carry out any task. No matter what that woman asked, he would definitely do anything. Amelia realized that with this recent discovery, the Perdium family would soon recover financially, but they need to act before those stones are sold. The knight didn't understand her idea, so the girl explained that she had just received the news, and that they had obtained those stones only a few days ago. There hasn't been enough time for them to sell them yet. This is her chance to act, because it's obvious where they'll go to sell those stones. The knight assumed her plan was to intercept the distribution line, but he had no idea where that would take place. Amelia said there's only one place in the entire north, the Scarlet Magic Tower, which is led by Archmage Delmud. This ore is essential for magical research, and every tower will want to get their hands on it. She wants to send her assassins to interfere with the route, launching several attacks to prevent the cargo from reaching its destination and to steal it for herself. Her knight pointed out that there's another magic tower in the territory of Brevin and asked if she really believed they'd choose a different route. She said she had heard some rumors, and at the magic tower there no longer represents any real force. Besides, she summarized, our protagonist is obsessed with money. He'll go wherever the profit seems greater. Amelia believes that this time she will strip our boy of everything he owns. Meanwhile, our protagonist is lying in bed, recovering from the wounds he sustained during that expedition. He began to recall what had happened with the serpent, when he was swallowed by that massive predator. He had already reached the monster's esophagus. The entire place was filled with venom capable of melting its victims. The mana from his third core was burning away the excess venom, preventing it from contacting his body. Even so, he had inhaled a great amount of it. Most of the serpent's victims die at this stage. Cecil realized he had to endure just a little longer. He couldn't lose consciousness in that place, to protect everything that is precious to him, including the future that hasn't happened yet. If he couldn't rid himself of the venom, it would become a part of him, causing all the venom that entered his body to be absorbed into his mana core. The movement of each of his mana cores would surely neutralize the poison's effect. This is a very delicate process. Only those who have transcended the limits of humanity are capable of doing it, turning the venom into fuel to increase his mana even further. At last, our boy woke up from that strange dream. He realized that his body felt much better. He woke up in his room but couldn't remember the most recent events. He only remembered being forgiven by his father. Lost in those thoughts, he noticed his sister was there beside him. She hugged him the moment he stood up. She said he'd been unconscious for 2 days, he left the castle without a word, and as soon as he returned, he collapsed without warning. Despite everything, she welcomed him back. Our protagonist became worried about his sister, who immediately pushed him away since she doesn't like hugging him too often. Leaving his room, she began calling for Belinda, saying her brother had awakened. Our protagonist didn't want to have been unconscious for 2 whole days. After escaping from that creature's insides, he had only needed minimal help from Belinda. He wanted to use his time more effectively, but this body is still too young for that. Even though he had surpassed his limits last time, he was already feeling much better, believing that 2 days of rest had really been enough. But the sensation was truly strange, because his recovery rate had improved significantly, along with his mana storage capacity. After that, he noticed that the attribute of his mana had changed as well. He began to think, the energy from that creature had altered his mana while he was trying to neutralize all the venom. Not even in his past life did he know it was possible to grow stronger in that way. He hadn't done it intentionally, but risking his life may really have been worth it. He realized he needed to put his body through some tests. But if he follows his strategy, he could become even stronger. However, he has immediate priorities. Selling those stones is essential. Since a few days have passed, many people likely already know what he accomplished. He needs to gather his mercenaries immediately. Hearing a knock at the door, he said Belinda didn't need to do that. But a man in armor was entering the room. In the company of those women, the Lord himself was also present, seeing with his own eyes that our protagonist had awakened. The boy hadn't been expecting a visit from his father. Belinda told him everything, how he came in contact with the serpent's venom by jumping into its mouth, so she wanted to know if he was feeling better. As soon as our boy answered positively, the Lord revealed he was relieved. Belinda asked if he had any idea how worried she was when he passed out, so she wanted to know if he was really okay, and he said yes. That's when his father called in once again. He said they needed to talk, because that man had a favor to ask of his son. Our protagonist hadn't expected anything like that to happen, and was surprised by the request. Our protagonist had gone to the training hall with his father. In his entire life, including his first one, this was the first time such a thing happened. They had never been alone in the training hall before. Cecil hadn't been cooperative in his first life either, as he avoided his father as much as possible just to avoid dealing with him. And his father apologized for making such a request right when his son had just woken up. But our protagonist said it was fine as he had already slept for 2 whole days. Now he wanted to know what kind of favor his father had to ask. The man remained silent for a few moments, until he finally looked away from his son. Our boy was trying to understand what that might mean, and he began to wonder if this was what his mother had once told him about his father. They were sitting on the grass, admiring the land, when his mother said her husband wasn't very good with words. The boy asked her for more details. She said he often claimed he had to be the pillar for all those people. He always put others first and could never be honest about how he felt. The only time she had ever seen him express himself was when he confessed his feelings for her. And at that moment, she was advising her son to be understanding with his father, because he wasn't good at expressing himself. Now the Lord asked our protagonist to draw his sword. Our boy began to feel a bit uneasy about what might happen, but he decided he would obey his father. The two began a sparring match. The Lord was truly exceptional with the sword, and our boy had years of training as a mercenary. That fight progressed like a well-structured training session, until they finally stepped back to catch their breath. The boy realized his father's strikes were heavy, and that unfamiliar stance was the Lord's fencing style. He clearly had the strength to repel the barbarians near the border, while still being gentle enough to protect everyone else. Our protagonist decided he would show a few moves of his own. His father was surprised by that maneuver, but still managed to block the attack without being caught off guard. Both were ready to go on the offensive again, but had to stop the last moment as the match had ended in a draw. Each had gotten dangerously close to vital points. The Lord said that the boy had greatly improved his swordsmanship. Cecil thanked him for the compliment, but the Lord wasn't finished speaking. He began giving him advice, saying the boy should relax his shoulders more and apply less pressure when clashing blades with an opponent. He didn't doubt his son's strength, but believed he was easily read by his enemies. Thinking about that comment, our boy realized it might be true. He tends to move on instinct once a fight starts. That's when he realized that in his entire life, this was the first time he had ever received any sort of training. All of his technique came from real combat. It was pure instinct. And maybe he had ignored some details simply because he'd never learned to fight in a traditional way. Now his father was pointing out those flaws. Cecil had never trusted others because he'd never found someone he could trust like this. But receiving advice in that moment definitely wasn't a bad thing. So he thanked his father for teaching him. The Lord remained silent, then said that, in truth, this had been a reprimand, and the boy didn't understand. His father said that even though he had achieved much, it was still a fact that he had broken the rules. If people begin to ignore them, thinking that results justify their actions, all they'll create is chaos. Cecil realized that made a lot of sense. What complicates everything for the Lord is that his son had changed a great deal in the last few days. It seemed that his son was envisioning a reward far beyond the reach of any of them. The Lord asked him to stay on that path and to keep thinking about House Perdium and those around him, so that he can fulfill his responsibilities when he becomes the Lord of those lands. Our boy knows he already has many responsibilities, but then he remembered something. His father was almost leaving the room when Cecil recalled that he had a favor to ask, but had yet to say anything. The Lord stayed silent for a moment, then let out a deep sigh to speak to his son. He asked if he could borrow a bit of money from him. Shortly after that, in the camp within the monster forest, our protagonist was gathered with his private army. All those men showed great respect to the young master. Speaking to all of them, Cecil hoped they had gotten plenty of rest, and the men responded that they were all doing well. Cecil then went to speak with his closest subordinates, Kaor and Gillian, who noticed he was already better. The boy apologized for making them wait. Looking to the old mercenary, he asked how Rachel, his daughter, was doing, and the man said he never imagined she'd be able to walk on her own again. There were no words to express the gratitude he felt toward the young master. Cecil felt deeply thankful for having been able to help that man. Now that he was gathered with the 3 closest members of his army, he said he had something to tell all of them. The Perdium territory was in grave danger, and his subordinates were shocked upon hearing those words, trying to understand what he meant. Then he revealed to them the circumstances in which his sister was nearly assassinated, and how they were planning her death to use it as an excuse to justify a territorial war, but the boy had managed to delay it. He also shared how he had discovered the body of Deagold's heir in an abandoned house, revealing to them the forces conspiring against his family. Certainly someone was spying on them, and it must be someone who had been in those lands for a long time. At this very moment, they had neither the time nor the resources to launch an attack. Now Belinda understood why the boy had been in such a rush. She thought the discovery of that ore might mean a bit of rest. Kara was impressed. First the forest, now a war. Things around here never get boring. Gillian said that if all of this was true, they had become the perfect target. A great treasure was discovered in a place with weak defenses and financial trouble. Cecil agreed. This territory practically had a giant target painted on its back. Belinda said something so important should already have been shared with them. They needed to take this information to the castle. But the boy said there was still no time. Even his sister's personal guard had betrayed her, so there were certainly spies among the others. And right now, they couldn't tell friend from foe. They still had a little time because Helena was alive, but now that the treasure had been discovered, their enemies had no reason to wait. Surely, a harsh battle was approaching them all. A heavy silence fell over that tent. Kor said he would serve him, because being by this noble's side had always brought plenty of entertainment. Gillian said he had already pledged his life to him and would follow him to the end, while Belinda declared that no one could protect him better than she could. Our boy was filled with excitement at the loyalty of all those people, that the greatest enemy of his family now was Duke Delphine, as well as Count Desmond and his former fiancée Amelia, and our boy was not going to let them carry out their plans. He told all his men that they were heading to the Red Magic Tower. Kor realized that they were finally going to sell those stones. He was eager to see some real money. Belinda asked if it wouldn't be better to go to the Scarlet Tower, since they might pay more. Cecil believed there would be less conflict if they went to the Red Magic Tower. Gillian knew that transporting something so valuable would always attract attention, and it was better that they planned things out. Belinda understood there was a risk of being ambushed once again. He knew the Scarlet Tower could bring more profit, but if the Red Tower wanted to return to its former glory, they couldn't afford to ignore this opportunity. But he wasn't going there just for that. There was someone in that land he needed to find at any cost. In the region where the Red Magic Tower is located, there was a girl deeply dedicated to the study of magic, and she was thinking about Master Lonato. She was already beginning to lose hope because her master had promised that one day light would appear in her life, but the girl no longer knew how much longer she would have to wait.